What if the secret to reversing aging wasn't in a lab, but already in your fridge? Frank Dawson never expected that question to flip his life upside down. Sitting on his worn-out recliner in his one-bedroom home in Austin, Texas, the 70-year-old ex-NASA engineer had gotten used to silence. Not peaceful silence, no, this was the kind that crept under your skin, hollow and heavy. His mornings were predictable: oatmeal, 5 pills, and the click of his remote as he tuned into morning news that rarely changed. But that question. It came from a random podcast clip that popped up on his phone. He didn't even remember subscribing to the show. The host's voice was fast-talking, urgent. Elon Musk funded a private health project that allegedly helped older test subjects rebuild lost muscle mass in weeks. And guess what? It wasn't some futuristic machine, it started with 3 weird foods. One of the participants, a 68-year-old man who walked with a cane, now deadlifting 200 pounds. Real or scam? Frank scoffed. Snake oil. Total BS. Still, that question stuck. It followed him into the kitchen. It hummed in the back of his mind as he fumbled to open a jar of pickles with hands that shook more than they used to. It echoed while he stared blankly out the window at his overgrown backyard, where his late wife used to garden before the cancer took her. He wanted to believe there was something more, something he hadn't tried. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? It happened at the checkout line in H-E-B. Frank was buying canned soup and bananas when the fluorescent lights above him blurred into a swirl of white and yellow. His knees buckled. The cashier's voice turned into a muffled echo as he hit the ground. By the time the EMTs arrived, Frank's blood pressure was tanked, his breathing shallow. In the ambulance, he could hear someone ask his name, but the memory of his response was gone. He woke up in St. David's Medical Center, confused and angry. A young doctor with dark-rimmed glasses and a clipboard said what Frank already feared. You've got signs of muscle atrophy, early-stage sarcopenia. If you don't start eating better and exercising, even just walking, you're putting yourself at serious risk of another collapse. Or worse. Frank barely heard the rest. Words like frailty, mobility risk, and independence buzzed around like flies he couldn't swat away. 3 days later, back at home, a new email pinged into Frank's inbox. Subject: You still alive, old man? I might have something for you. From Charles.Morrison@privateresearch.org. He blinked. Charles Morrison. That name hadn't crossed his mind in almost 2 decades. They had worked together at Johnson Space Center in the 90s. Charles was the quirky biologist obsessed with human resilience. Always testing something weird: fasting, blood oxygen, biohacks. Frank opened the email. I saw a clip that reminded me of you. Funny enough, it was about a study I helped build, privately funded by some guy you might have heard of, Elon Musk. Sounds crazy, but it's legit. I can't say much in writing, but it has to do with 3 natural compounds that slow muscle aging. No drugs. No surgery. Just food. Interested? Frank sat in silence, rereading the message until the screen dimmed. His hand drifted to the photo frame on the side table, his wife Martha smiling in front of the Grand Canyon, the wind catching her straw hat. She had told him once, don't let life fade into routine. You have too much left to give. He hadn't listened then. His phone buzzed again. Text from Julia. Hey Dad. Just checking in. Can we talk this weekend? You've been quiet. Love you. He didn't answer. He couldn't face her yet. She had begged him to move in, to be closer to the grandkids. But he'd insisted on staying alone. Independence, he had called it. Now it just felt like isolation. He clicked reply on the email. What are these 3 foods? And why the hell would Elon Musk care about my old body? That night, Frank couldn't sleep. He kept thinking of the phrase the doctor used, early-stage atrophy. It sounded like his body had already started quitting without telling him. He stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, stooped, soft, tired eyes. Was it too late to fight back? A sudden thought hit him. What if Musk really had found something? This was the man who launched rockets, tunneled cities, and talked about colonizing Mars. If he thought aging could be recoded, was it that absurd? In the morning, Charles wrote back with only one line. You won't believe what fermented beets, wild sardines, and lion's mane mushroom can do to a dying body. Frank laughed out loud. That's either the worst dinner I've ever heard of, or a miracle. He stared at the screen, debating. Then, with more curiosity than confidence, he opened a new tab and typed. Where to buy lion's mane mushroom, Austin, Texas. Maybe this wasn't about believing. Maybe it was just about trying, before time ran out. Before the collapse, before the email from Charles, before lion's mane mushrooms even entered his vocabulary, Frank Dawson was just an old man trying not to disappear. At 68, Frank was the kind of person you'd walk past at the grocery store without a second thought, khakis too loose around the waist, sneakers white but worn, a flannel shirt buttoned all the way up because he was saving on heating. His house was modest, nestled between two newer condos in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood in Austin. It still had wood paneling from the 80s and a porch swing that groaned every time he sat on it. But Frank hadn't always been invisible. Once, Frank worked on the front lines of space exploration. As a systems engineer for NASA, he helped design early structural modules for the ISS. Later, he consulted for SpaceX when they were still proving rockets could land themselves. He'd been in rooms with astronauts, billionaires, physicists, and Elon Musk himself. Frank had never been the flashy type, though. He was the guy who kept the ship steady while others grabbed headlines. He liked numbers, precision, and quiet excellence. His greatest pride wasn't being in those rooms, it was coming home every night to his wife, Martha, who greeted him like he was a hero anyway. They met in 1982, when Martha was a schoolteacher, and Frank was a fresh NASA hire with a busted-down car and a dream of walking on Mars. She didn't care about space. She cared that he looked her in the eyes when he talked and that he made her laugh when no one else could. They married a year later. For decades, they were inseparable. While Frank poured his mind into engineering, Martha grounded him in the real world. Picnics, church bake sales, spontaneous road trips to nowhere. She never let him get too lost in the stars. When Julia, their only daughter, was born in 1987, Frank cried harder than he had during any rocket launch. He promised he'd never miss her childhood, and he didn't. He built her a telescope from scratch for her 9th birthday. Drove her to every science fair. Cheered the loudest at her graduation, despite tearing a muscle in his back the week before. But when Martha died 5 years ago, something in Frank dimmed. A part of him switched off like a circuit that couldn't be rewired. Grief wasn't loud for Frank. It was subtle. His routine stayed the same, oatmeal in the morning, morning paper, slow walks. But everything had lost color. He kept Martha's slippers by the bed. Her favorite coffee mug still sat on the kitchen counter, collecting dust. Julia noticed the change, of course. She tried everything, inviting him over for holidays, asking him to move closer, even setting him up with a therapist. But Frank waved it all away with phrases like, "I'm fine," and "Don't worry about me." The truth was, he did want help. He just didn't know how to ask. And so he shrank, not physically at first, but emotionally. Conversations got shorter. Visits became rare. His body, once broad and steady, began to shrink too, almost as if mirroring what he felt inside. Frank hadn't told Julia about the fainting episode. Or the diagnosis. He could already imagine her reaction. Anger laced with fear, that look she inherited from Martha where her jaw tightened and her eyes welled up at the same time. He hated disappointing her. Julia was a nurse. Sharp, practical, but always full of heart. She'd been the one organizing everything when Martha got sick, the meds, the hospice visits, the finances. Frank remembered sitting by Martha's bedside in her final days, holding her hand while Julia knelt at the foot of the bed, whispering words of comfort through her tears. That memory haunted him more than the funeral. After the collapse at the grocery store, Frank had expected the doctor's warnings. What surprised him more was how relieved he felt afterward. Like someone had finally confirmed what his body had been trying to say for years: "You're falling apart." But then came Charles's email. And suddenly, there was a flicker of something Frank hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope. Not yet. Curiosity. Frank had always trusted data, research, facts. If Charles, someone he respected, claimed there was real science behind these foods, maybe it wasn't so far-fetched. Maybe there was something left to fight for. Frank grabbed a legal pad and pen, sat down at the kitchen table, and wrote. Project, Reverse Atrophy. Mission objective, strength, energy, clarity. Then he drew 3 boxes. Fermented beets. Sardines. Lion's mane mushroom. He started taking notes from online journals and PubMed articles. He even found a TEDx talk on lion's mane and its effects on brain function. The data was preliminary, but compelling. Anti-inflammatory benefits. Nerve growth stimulation. Increased mitochondrial function. It felt like reading blueprints again, except this time, he was the system. That night, Frank dreamt of Martha. She was in their garden, humming, pulling weeds, her hands in the soil. She looked up and smiled, not a sad smile, but the kind he hadn't seen since before the hospital gowns. "You're not done yet, Frank," she said. "You've got more left in you than you think." He woke up with tears on his cheeks and a decision made. He would try Charles's protocol. Not because he believed in miracles, but because Martha had always believed in him. The next morning, Julia called again. 3rd time this week. Frank stared at the screen as it buzzed in his hand. He let it ring. He wasn't ready to explain the hospital visit. He wasn't ready to hear the disappointment in her voice. And truthfully, he wasn't ready to admit that maybe, just maybe, she'd been right all along. But even though he didn't answer, the past wasn't something he could ignore forever. Julia Dawson had once been Daddy's girl. Back when scraped knees needed band-aids and bedtime stories were about spacewalks and moon landings, not cholesterol and cardiologists. She used to think her father could fix anything. He built her a treehouse before she could even read. He painted stars on her ceiling that glowed at night, pointing out Orion's belt with a flashlight from the hallway. He showed up to every PTA meeting, science fair, and piano recital, even if he didn't care much for piano. He cheered like it was the Super Bowl. But things changed after Martha passed. Frank retreated. He became more like a ghost than a dad, floating through holidays, offering polite smiles but not much else. Conversations turned transactional. "How's work?" "Fine." "Need anything?" "No, I'm okay." Julia had grown tired of reaching out and getting nothing back. It wasn't anger, not exactly, it was grief layered in frustration. Watching the strongest man she knew turn into a shell of himself hurt in a way she couldn't describe. Frank knew he'd let the space between them grow too wide. There were things he never told her, about the sleepless nights after Martha died, about how empty the house felt without her humming in the kitchen, about the fear that he'd become a burden, not a father. He remembered the last real argument they had. Julia had asked him to move in after she noticed bruises on his arm. He had fallen trying to change a light bulb. He waved her off. "I'm fine, Jules. I can take care of myself." She'd stared at him for a long time before saying, softly, You're not just shutting me out, Dad. You're shutting Mom out, too. He never responded to that. And she never brought it up again. Sunday mornings used to be sacred. Pancakes. Coffee. Frank reading the paper while Martha and Julia bickered over blueberries versus chocolate chips. Laughter echoing in the kitchen. Now, Sunday mornings were quiet. Too quiet. Frank sat at the table, sipping black coffee and staring at the untouched chair across from him. That's when he heard the email chime. Subject, reminder, dinner this Sunday. Don't ghost your daughter, old man. From Julia Dawson julia.d@austinhealth.org. He smiled despite himself. The next day, Frank did something he hadn't done in years, he cooked. Well, he tried. He printed out a basic recipe for a salad using fermented beets, sardines, and thin slices of sautéed lion's mane mushroom. The kitchen filled with the unfamiliar smell of fish and earth. He burned the mushrooms, oversalted the beets, and the sardines looked like they came from a bait shop. It was awful. But it was a start. He forced himself to eat it, one bite at a time. Gagging at first, then chewing slowly. By the end, his stomach wasn't thrilled, but his mind felt something else. Commitment. It was bitter. It was uncomfortable. But it was movement. It was forward. He scribbled in his notepad. Day 1. Tastes like regret. But I'm doing this. Later that evening, he finally texted Julia back. Frank. I'll come to dinner. Sunday. Bring the grandkids. I might even tell them about the time I almost crashed a SpaceX simulation. No reply right away. Then. Julia. I'll make brownies. But you're doing dishes. He chuckled. For the first time in months, something lightened inside him. That night, Frank went into the attic. It had been years since he touched the boxes up there. He pulled down one labeled, Martha's Keepsakes. Inside were old photo albums, dried flower bouquets, and a cassette tape. On the label, in Martha's neat handwriting, Julia's 6th birthday, backyard rocket launch. Frank smiled. He remembered that day like it was yesterday. He had built a model rocket with Julia, painted pink and silver. When it launched, it barely cleared the fence before nosediving into the neighbor's rose bush. Julia had screamed with laughter. They had eaten chocolate cake in the sun. It wasn't about the rocket. It was never about the rocket. It was about being together. He knew now, if he had any chance of getting his life back, his health, his daughter, his identity, he had to keep going. Frank went to the fridge. He opened the container of fermented beets and stared at them like they were enemies. But he reached for a fork anyway. This time, he didn't eat them as a chore. This time, he ate them like a man who had something to prove. To himself. To Julia. To the man he used to be. The clinic smelled like hand sanitizer and old magazines. Frank sat in the exam room, fidgeting with the edge of the paper sheet on the table, the kind that always tore no matter how carefully you shifted. He hated these rooms. Too sterile. Too bright. Too many truths hanging in the air like 4 bags waiting to be hooked into your arm. Dr. Patel walked in holding a clipboard and a tablet. She was maybe in her late 30s, sharp-eyed and always polite, but not the sugar-coating type. Frank liked her for that. Well, Mr. Dawson, she began, her tone soft but serious, your test results are in. He braced himself. Always the same rhythm, cholesterol, blood pressure, weight. A checklist of everything going wrong. But this time, it hit differently. You're showing signs of accelerated muscle atrophy, she said. Early-stage sarcopenia. It's not just age-related, it's progressing faster than it should. Frank stared at her. The word sarcopenia sounded like a sentence more than a diagnosis. Can you translate that into English? He he asked, half joking. She gave a sympathetic smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Your muscle mass is shrinking. That's why you're feeling weaker, more tired, off balance. Your body is breaking down faster than it's rebuilding. It's not just about being tired, this leads to falls, fractures, and eventually, loss of mobility. There was a pause. Then. We can slow it down. But you've got to act now. Frank cleared his throat. So what, more vitamins? Lift some weights? Dr. Patel shook her head. That's part of it. But we need a full reset. Nutrition, exercise, sleep, hydration, the works. If you don't build muscle, and fast, you're looking at assisted living in 5 years. Maybe less. Frank flinched. That word again, assisted. It tasted like defeat. You're saying I'm decaying? She nodded slowly. Not out of cruelty, but honesty. I'm saying you're not dying yet. But if you don't change things, your independence will. She tapped the tablet screen and turned it toward him. A bar graph showed his muscle density dropping steeply year over year. It was like watching his life get erased in pixels. Back in his car, Frank sat in the parking lot, gripping the wheel but going nowhere. The words circled in his head like vultures: loss of mobility, assisted living, accelerated decline. It wasn't just about feeling weak anymore. This was his future, being wheeled around in hospitals, having someone else tie his shoes, being a bystander in his own life. Hell no. He thought of Martha again. Of the last real conversation they'd had in the hospital. Don't let yourself go hollow, Frank, she had whispered, her voice frail but clear. When I'm gone, don't disappear with me. He had nodded through tears, but in truth, he had let go. He'd faded. Let his bones soften and his will wither. But now he had a reason to push back. He remembered Charles's message. 3 foods. Real science. Start there. That night, Frank got to work. He cleared off the old dining table and spread out his notes. It looked like a low-budget science lab, printouts from research journals, scribbled graphs, highlighted ingredient lists. He labeled a whiteboard with the title. Recline, Restoring Energy, Clarity, Longevity, Independence, Mobility, Balance. Under it, he wrote the 3 key components of the protocol. 1. Fermented beet extract, increases nitric oxide, boosts circulation and endurance. 2. Wild-caught sardines, rich in omega-3s and CoQ10, supports heart and muscle health. 3. Lion's mane mushroom, promotes neurogenesis, improves brain muscle signaling. He didn't understand all the biology yet. But he knew systems. Input, output, feedback loop. His body was just another system in decline, and he was going to engineer a recovery. The first 3 days were brutal. The beet juice tasted like sour dirt. The sardines were oily and left his mouth coated for hours. Lion's mane was hard to find fresh, so he settled for capsules and powder mixed into water that resembled mud. He almost gave up on day 3, after waking up with a splitting headache and stomach cramps. He had to run to the bathroom 3 times before noon. I'm not rebuilding muscle, he muttered into the mirror. I'm evacuating it. But then he remembered Dr. Patel's words. You're not dying yet. So he held on. By day 5, something strange happened. He took his usual short walk to the mailbox, and realized halfway there he wasn't short of breath. His knees didn't ache as much. His vision, which usually blurred under bright sunlight, felt sharper. He stopped at the end of the driveway, looked back at his house, and thought. Okay. Maybe something's happening. It wasn't a miracle. He wasn't sprinting or lifting weights yet. But it was enough to light the fuse. He went back inside, grabbed a notebook, and logged. Day 5, no nap today. 300 extra steps. Not dying yet. That night, Julia stopped by unannounced. She looked around the kitchen and raised an eyebrow at the jars and powders lined up on the counter. "What's all this, Dad? You making moonshine or potions?" Frank grinned. He hadn't seen her smile like that in a while. "Just hacking the system," he said. "Trying to outrun a walker before it catches me." Julia softened. "You look better. Less pale." He nodded. "Trying something new. It's weird. Might be crazy. But I think I found a reason to stop giving up." She didn't press for details. But she stayed an hour longer than usual. Before she left, she hugged him tighter than she had in months. "Whatever you're doing," she whispered, "keep going." Frank wasn't expecting anything in his inbox that morning, just the usual spam, grocery coupons, and one too many newsletters he forgot to unsubscribe from. But there it was, glowing like a beacon in bold. From Charles Morrison. Subject, ready to go deeper. He clicked it. "Frank, if you're still interested, I've attached some internal slides from our trial with Project Kairos. We're calling it a longevity accelerator, but really, it's a biological repair sequence triggered through food-based compounds. No one's talking about it publicly yet, but we're not under full NDA anymore. Elon's people are shifting the funding focus toward AI integration. Which means the human trials are technically closed. But I've kept the protocol. And I think you need to see what we found." Frank's pulse quickened. Attached was a PDF titled, Kairos Phase 2, Muscular Recovery and Neuroinflammatory Suppression Through Functional Nutrition. He opened it, and his world tilted. The slides weren't what he expected. No branding. No flashy marketing language. Just clinical summaries, charts, and before and after MRIs of muscle density in elderly patients, many of whom looked even worse off than he was at the start. And then there it was. Test subject number 018, male, 68, type 2 diabetes, history of cardiac fatigue. Result, plus 21% muscle regeneration over 6 weeks. Cognitive clarity score increased by 38%. Mobility index improved from 2.1 to 4.7. Frank read every page like it was scripture. The document cited experimental combinations of betaine, from beets supporting methylation and detox pathways. EPA/DHA, from sardines reducing muscle inflammation. Hericinones and irinocines, from lions mane stimulating nerve regeneration and possibly reversing mild degenerative decline. One phrase jumped out at him. Unlike pharmaceuticals, this protocol relies on synchronized absorption through whole food matrices. It isn't a supplement, it's a sequence. Frank leaned back, stunned. This wasn't a fad. This wasn't a TikTok health tip. This was engineered. He hadn't spoken to Charles in 17 years, but his old number was still in Frank's dusty address book. And to his surprise, it still worked. The voice on the other end sounded older, raspier, but unmistakably Charles. "Frank the Tank. I figured you'd call eventually." "Charles. I thought you were off-grid or running some underground lab in Utah." "Close. Colorado. You'd love it, clean air, good trout, and no one breathing down your neck while you rebuild mitochondria." Frank chuckled, but his voice turned serious. "You were right. About everything. I've started the foods. I'm 5 days in. Feeling different." There was a pause. "Then it's working," Charles said. "And it's only just beginning. But listen, there's more to this than the foods." Frank raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? What if I told you Elon didn't just fund Kairos to help seniors get stronger?" Charles continued. "What if I told you he wanted to see what parts of the human body could be rebuilt before we start sending people to Mars permanently?" Frank frowned. "You're saying this was a space test?" "In a way. He's thinking long-term survival, off-world colonists, aging in low gravity. But we found that these 3 foods, when timed and dosed right, can trigger a recovery cascade even under Earth's harshest aging conditions. Muscle, memory, even mood. So why isn't it out there yet? Frank asked. Charles sighed. Because it doesn't make anyone billions. You can't patent beets and sardines, Frank. You can't copyright mushrooms. No one in pharma wants this. Frank's stomach twisted. The thought that something so powerful, so simple, could be buried because it wasn't profitable made his blood boil. So what do we do with this? He asked. You keep doing what you're doing. Keep logging. Keep observing. Because, my friend, you're going to be my proof. Charles promised to send a deeper breakdown, protocol timing, cycling methods, recipes, even light mobility exercises tied to mitochondrial bursts. It's not just about eating the food, Charles explained. It's when and how you pair it. Think like an engineer, Frank. This is all timing and sequence. Frank grinned. Good. Because I'm building a plan. They talked for an hour, swapping war stories, laughing about old lab disasters, and debating whether Elon really planned to upload his consciousness to a server someday. As they hung up, Charles added one final note. By the way, one of the Phase 1 test subjects just ran a 10K last month. He's 73. Frank's eyes widened. You're kidding. Not even close. I'm telling you, Frank. This isn't a fluke. You might just have more life left in you than you think. That night, Frank looked in the mirror again. The face staring back was still wrinkled, still gray-haired. But the eyes? They were different. They weren't tired. They weren't defeated. They were curious. Focused. Alive. He opened his journal and scribbled a new title across the top of the page. Protocol Log, Phase 1. Frank Dawson, Human Test Subject Number 019. Then, beneath it. Objective, don't just live longer. Live better. Live awake. The morning air bit hard. Frank stepped outside just past 6 a.m., sneakers laced, jacket zipped to the neck. He hadn't been out this early since Martha's funeral. The sidewalk glistened with dew. The world felt like it hadn't fully woken up yet. Neither had he. But today was different. Today, he was testing his body. At first, it was just a lap around the block. Same route he always used for his pretend exercise, a stroll so slow the squirrels didn't even move out of his way. But today, he picked up the pace. Not a jog, not yet. But a deliberate, marching rhythm. Arms swinging. Core tight like Charles had suggested. Breathing through his nose. Inhale. Step. Exhale. Step. By the second lap, his calves burned. His right hip started barking like an old dog waking from a nap. By the third, he was limping. He wanted to stop. But something inside said, not yet. So he went one more lap. And that's when it hit. It wasn't dramatic. No ambulance. No crowd. Just one sharp, seizing pain behind his knee, so fast, so cruel, it knocked him off balance and sent him down onto the grass with a grunt. Frank didn't scream. Didn't cry. He just sat there, stunned, gripping his leg and grinding his teeth. He hated this. Hated how fragile he felt. He punched the ground, not hard enough to break skin, but enough to feel it. Damn it, he growled. I was doing everything right. He sat on that lawn for 10 minutes, staring at a dying oak tree across the street. Then, slowly, painfully, he got back on his feet. The pain triggered something. A memory he hadn't thought of in decades. 1993, he was working on the ISS Truss framework at NASA. One of the welders had made a mistake in a critical joint. Frank caught it hours before testing. He brought it to his supervisor, who told him to let it slide. Frank didn't. He called it out in front of the entire team. It almost cost him his job, but it saved millions in potential damage. Later that night, Martha asked him, "Why'd you risk it?" He had said, "Because the moment you stop fighting for what's right, you stop being useful." That line came back now, as he stood with a throbbing knee in the Texas dawn. He wasn't done being useful yet. Back home, he hobbled to the kitchen and dumped lion's mane powder into his coffee like it was some kind of magic fix. But his scientist brain kicked in again. What exactly is happening in my knee? He dove into the notes Charles had sent him. Muscle microtears. Inflammation. Cytokine overexpression. But also, mitochondrial activation. Neural resensitization. Regenerative pain. That last phrase made him stop. Regenerative pain. It wasn't a phrase used in mainstream medicine, but it showed up in experimental journals, especially in Kairos docs. Charles had underlined one line in red. Pain is not always a failure signal, it can be a recalibration signal during neuromuscular reawakening. Frank rubbed his knee and exhaled. Maybe this wasn't a breakdown. Maybe it was a reboot. Frank. Collapsed on my walk today. Right knee. Sharp pain, but no pop. Still walked back home. Is that part of the recalibration? Charles replied 5 minutes later. Charles. Yes. It's realignment. Your nerves are catching up to your movement. Take magnesium. Light stretch. Don't quit. Frank. Hurts like hell. Charles. Good. That means you're alive again. That afternoon, Julia stopped by with the kids, Tyler and Emma, 11 and 7. Frank hadn't seen them in weeks. Tyler noticed his limp right away. What happened, Grandpa? Did you fight a bear? Frank grinned. Just my own legs, kiddo. They've been asleep for too long. I'm trying to wake them up. Emma handed him a drawing, stick figures, one of them with gray hair lifting weights. Underneath, in purple crayon, it said, "Get strong again, Grandpa. Love, M." He nearly cried. Frank pushed through the pain that night. He followed Charles's recovery sequence. Beet juice with lemon to flush toxins. Stretching with heat therapy on the knee. Lion's mane tea to support nerve regeneration. Sardine salad on a slice of rye toast, topped with arugula and turmeric. He logged everything. Day 6, collapse. Pain. Recovery sequence initiated. No fear. Only progress. He lay in bed with an ice pack and a soft smile. Because for the first time in years, the pain wasn't a punishment. It was proof he was alive. The days were beginning to blend together for Frank. What had started as an experiment in desperation was now turning into something more, something he didn't fully understand but couldn't ignore. His knee still ached, but not as much. He felt different, not just physically, but mentally too. His brain was sharper. He had energy. And most importantly, for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was moving towards something rather than just existing in the slow crawl of time. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Frank made a startling discovery. He'd been on the couch, staring at his tablet, flipping through the research Charles had sent him, when he stumbled upon an article titled, "The Surprising Truth About Beetroot and Its Impact on Aging Muscle Cells." The article was from a medical journal, but it wasn't anything groundbreaking. Frank had read plenty of studies on beets before. The nitrates, the increased blood flow, the improved oxygenation. But this article mentioned something he hadn't seen before. Beetroot compounds, specifically betalains, have been shown to reverse the age-related decline in mitochondrial function in human skeletal muscle cells, improving endurance and strength. Frank sat up, tapping his fingers on the table, his mind racing. Could it be true? Was this the missing piece? He had been focused on the food itself, but he hadn't considered the why behind it. The idea that something as simple as a beet could not only increase blood flow but actually reverse cellular aging was a revelation. It was almost too simple to be true, and yet here it was, in a peer-reviewed journal. By now, Frank had learned not to trust just one piece of information. He was a scientist, after all. He needed to test everything, to push the boundaries of what he knew, and what he thought was possible. So, when he read another article about a bizarre but potentially useful experiment, beets in brownies, he knew he had to try it. It was a food blogger's crazy idea: use beetroot in brownie batter to make a rich, dark dessert that was good for you. It seemed insane, but at this point, Frank wasn't dismissing anything. He had already started incorporating the foods Charles had outlined in his daily meals, and the results were undeniable. If beets could be good for muscle regeneration in a savory form, why not sneak them into something more indulgent? After a quick trip to the local grocery store, Frank returned with a bag full of ingredients: dark chocolate, flour, cocoa powder, and, of course, beets. He started to mix the ingredients, carefully incorporating the finely grated beetroot into the batter. The result was a vibrant, ruby-red mixture that smelled surprisingly rich. He placed the tray in the oven, and as the brownies baked, Frank couldn't help but smile. Maybe this whole food as medicine thing wasn't such a bad idea after all. When the brownies were finally done, Frank pulled them out of the oven and let them cool for a few minutes. He took a knife, sliced through the warm, moist squares, and took the first bite. It was surprisingly good. Rich, fudgy, with just a hint of earthiness from the beets. The chocolate was deep and satisfying, and the texture was perfect. Frank took another bite. He hadn't expected the effect to be immediate, but somehow, it was. His knee didn't ache as much. His brain felt clearer. He set the brownie plate aside and grabbed his phone. Maybe Charles would have some insight into this. Frank, you're not going to believe this. I made beet brownies. And I think they're working. Charles, I told you the beets were magical. But brownies, huh? You might have just cracked the code. Frank chuckled. Frank, you think I can sell these as anti-aging brownies? Charles, if they work, you can sell anything. Just don't forget the lion's mane. That's the kicker. Frank nodded, though Charles couldn't see him. The lion's mane. Of course. The real magic behind the brain and muscle connection. The next few days were a whirlwind. Frank started doubling down on his experiment. He ate beets in every form: salads, juices, roasted beets in soups, beet hummus, and of course, the brownies became a nightly staple. The effects started to accumulate. His knee wasn't perfect, but it felt more stable. He noticed less inflammation in his joints and muscles. His strength wasn't skyrocketing, but there was steady, undeniable progress. Most importantly, his mind was clearer than it had been in years. He could focus for hours without his usual brain fog. But there was something else too, something intangible, yet noticeable. Frank started feeling younger. Not just in his body, but in his spirit. He hadn't felt this alive in so long, and he could tell the difference. The fog had lifted. It wasn't just about muscle recovery or reversing age. It was about rediscovering himself. One evening, as Frank prepared his usual dinner of grilled salmon with a side of beet salad, he had another revelation. What if he wasn't the only one? What if all these years, these decades, had been wasted because people simply didn't understand the connection between food and vitality? What if these foods, simple, whole foods, could change the trajectory of aging for millions? He thought back to the research he'd seen in Charles's slides. The aging population. The impact of food on muscle regeneration. The influence of simple, forgotten foods that had been dismissed by the pharmaceutical giants. And then he thought of the empty promises he'd heard from doctors over the years. Maybe this wasn't about just living longer. Maybe this was about living better, not waiting for someone to give you a pill that could cure your aging, but taking control of it, one bite at a time. Frank took a deep breath. This wasn't just a personal mission anymore. This was something bigger. He wasn't just healing himself. He was on the verge of a breakthrough that could change how the world thought about aging. It was Thursday afternoon when Frank made the decision that would change everything. He was sitting at his kitchen table, staring at the jar of lion's mane mushroom powder beside his cup of coffee, and reflecting on how far he had come. A few weeks ago, he could barely walk around the block without feeling like his body was betraying him. Now, he was making brownies packed with beets and feeling more energy and clarity than he had in years. He felt powerful. But not just because of his physical progress. It was the mental shift that had occurred, a shift that made him realize he wasn't alone in his struggle. He had been isolated for too long, caught in the loneliness of aging and the misconception that it was all downhill from here. But now, there was hope. And that hope wasn't just for him. As he finished his lunch, Frank thought about his neighbors. Most of them were in their 60s and 70s, people like him, who had lived through their own trials. Some were in worse shape than others. Mrs. Thompson next door could barely walk to the mailbox without gasping for breath, while Mr. Peterson, a widower, spent most of his time in a recliner, watching television. Then there was Steve. Steve was different. Frank had known Steve since their kids played together in the backyard. Steve was a former triathlete, always active, always pushing the limits. But in the last year, he had slowed down significantly. Frank had watched it happen, the once fit man now looking older than his years, complaining of back pain and fatigue. Frank hadn't said much to Steve about his experiment yet. It seemed so personal, so experimental, but now the more he thought about it, the more he realized it wasn't just about him. There was a community around him, a group of people who might benefit from the very same foods that had transformed him. The thought lingered, nagging at him. Maybe he could help them. Maybe they didn't have to accept the pain, the slow decline, the feeling of being over the hill. Maybe they could all change the narrative together. Later that evening, Frank grabbed his phone and texted Steve. Frank, hey Steve, you free for coffee tomorrow? Got something interesting I want to share with you. Steve replied within minutes. Steve, sure, man. Same time. Frank, yep, 10 a.m. See you then. Frank felt his heart race as he set his phone down. This was it. The first step toward something bigger than himself. The next morning, Frank met Steve at their usual cafe. He was wearing his usual windbreaker and a cap that covered his thinning hair. He looked a little more frail than he had the last time Frank saw him. Hey, Steve, Frank said with a smile, sliding into the booth across from his friend. How's it going? Steve sighed and took a sip of his coffee. You know, same old. Back's been acting up. I don't know what happened, but I feel like I'm aging in dog years now. Frank chuckled softly. Yeah, I know the feeling. I was there not too long ago. Steve looked up at him, a bit confused. What do you mean? Frank leaned in, lowering his voice. I've been working on something. Well, more like experimenting with something. Foods, supplements, stuff that might just change the way we think about getting old. And I'm feeling better than I have in years. Steve raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Like diet? Frank nodded. Yeah. Diet, but not just any diet. Certain foods that can help our muscles regenerate, keep our brains sharp, and even slow down some of the physical effects of aging. I've been doing it for a few weeks now, and the results are, well, surprising. Steve leaned back in his seat, skeptical but intrigued. Okay, I'm listening. What's the catch? Frank smiled and began explaining. He told Steve about the foods that had worked for him, beets, lion's mane mushrooms, and the surprising impact they had on his muscles and brain. He even told Steve about the beet brownies, and how that had made it all feel more like a lifestyle than a regimen. I've got to admit, Frank said, I feel stronger. My knee's not perfect, but it's way better. And my mind, it's clearer. I actually want to do things again, instead of just sitting around waiting for the next thing to hurt. Steve's expression softened, his guard lowering. That sounds almost too good to be true. I get it, Frank said. But I'm not making this up. I think you should try it. Just give it a shot. I'll help you get started. Steve looked at him for a long moment. What's the harm? I've been stuck in this rut for too long. Maybe it's worth a try. Over the next few days, Frank started talking to others. He shared his story with a few neighbors, and soon, word spread. What had started as a personal experiment became a small movement within his community. People began asking about the foods he was eating, the supplements he was taking, and how they could get involved. Frank didn't have all the answers, but he did know one thing: they needed each other. Aging didn't have to be a solo battle. They could lean on each other, share their successes, and grow stronger together. He began organizing weekly meetings in his living room, where they would talk about food, exercise, and aging. He shared his research, his progress, and, most importantly, he encouraged each person to take responsibility for their health, no matter their age. One evening, as Frank stood in his kitchen preparing dinner for the group, he realized something profound: his life had changed, but so had everyone else's. They were all starting to feel stronger, healthier, and more alive. The energy in the room during their meetings was electric, a shared commitment to not just surviving, but thriving. And in that moment, Frank knew this wasn't just about food anymore. This was about community. It was about taking control of your own health and helping others do the same. It was a Monday when the first unexpected phone call came. Frank was sitting in his office, organizing some research notes, when his phone buzzed. It was a number he didn't recognize. He hesitated for a moment before picking it up. Hello, Frank. The voice on the other end sounded urgent, almost as if the person had been waiting for a while to speak to him. Yeah, this is Frank. Who's this? This is Olivia. Olivia Rogers, from the Senior Health Network, the voice responded, with a warm yet professional tone. I've been hearing some interesting things about you. Would you have time to talk? Frank's heart skipped a beat. The Senior Health Network. He had heard of them, an organization dedicated to supporting seniors through wellness initiatives, diet, and fitness programs. Sure, Frank replied, trying to keep his composure. What's this about? Olivia's voice was steady but full of curiosity. We've heard that you've been experimenting with some unconventional methods, diet changes, specifically with beets and mushrooms, to help combat the aging process. We're interested in what you're doing. Could we meet? Frank set up a meeting for the following afternoon at a local coffee shop. When Olivia arrived, she was a woman in her mid-40s, with dark hair and glasses, her eyes bright with purpose. She introduced herself with a firm handshake, and they quickly got down to business. I've been speaking with several people in your neighborhood, Olivia began, sipping her latte, and they've mentioned you're seeing some significant results with your approach to nutrition. Can you tell me more about it? Frank felt a wave of pride mixed with a hint of nervousness. He had only shared his story within his community, now it seemed like this was becoming something much bigger. Well, Frank started, I've been looking into how certain foods, like beets, lion's mane mushrooms, and a few others, can actually help reverse some of the aging effects on muscles and the brain. I've been experimenting with this myself, and the results have been pretty remarkable. People in my neighborhood have joined me, and it's been incredible to see how everyone's benefiting. Olivia listened intently, taking notes. So you're saying these foods can reverse muscle aging? And not just in terms of strength, but also brain function. Exactly, Frank said, leaning forward. It's not a cure-all, but it's something that has made a significant difference. It's about giving the body the nutrients it needs to repair itself. Beets help with circulation, lion's mane boosts cognitive function, and there's other research showing how these foods can protect cells from aging. Olivia nodded, clearly intrigued. This is fascinating. You understand, Frank, that there are a lot of seniors out there looking for hope. The medical community is focusing on drugs and procedures, but there's little emphasis on the power of food. What you're doing might be the missing link. Frank had never thought of his experiment this way. He had always been focused on his own health, and now he realized that the work he had done in his kitchen could be part of something far larger. Olivia's words stayed with him long after their meeting. He was beginning to see that what he had been doing wasn't just a small-scale experiment, it was a potential movement. He wasn't alone in wanting to reclaim his health. There were thousands of others out there, just like him, seeking a way to reverse the clock and improve their lives without relying on the next pharmaceutical pill. The idea of bringing this to a broader audience started to grow in Frank's mind. Over the next week, Frank continued his routine of preparing meals, hosting meetings, and sharing his knowledge with his neighbors. However, he was no longer just telling people about the benefits of beets and mushrooms. He was starting to feel like he was at the center of something much larger. The ripple effect he had hoped for was beginning to happen. Word spread beyond his immediate circle. Local news outlets started picking up stories about Frank's experiment, and social media influencers in the wellness space began to reach out. Some were curious about the science behind it, others simply wanted to share his story with their followers. One evening, as Frank sat down to dinner, he received an email from a journalist at a major health and wellness publication. Subject: Exclusive interview request, Senior Health Breakthrough. Frank's heart raced as he read the email. They wanted to feature his story in their next issue. This was big. But was he ready for the attention? The next morning, Frank found himself in front of a camera in his living room, answering questions from the reporter who had flown in. She was young and vibrant, her pen scribbling across a notepad as she asked him about his journey. So, Frank, the reporter asked, how did you first get interested in the connection between food and aging? Frank took a deep breath, remembering the long nights of research and his conversation with Charles. It started with my own health. I was tired of feeling like my body was betraying me. So I dug into the science, looking for ways to feel better, ways to actually fight aging. And what I found changed my life. Now, it's not just about me, it's about everyone who's tired of just giving in to age. I want people to know they don't have to suffer. The reporter nodded. It's clear that you've made an incredible impact in your community. What's next for you? Frank paused, thinking. What's next? Well, I think this is just the beginning. I want to take what I've learned and share it with as many people as possible. There are millions of seniors out there who could benefit from this. I want to show them that aging doesn't have to mean slowing down. It can mean getting better. As the interview hit the newsstands, Frank's name began circulating in larger circles. The Senior Health Network reached out to him again, this time asking if he'd be willing to collaborate on a national campaign aimed at promoting nutrition-based aging solutions. His experiment was starting to attract attention from health professionals, researchers, and even companies in the wellness industry. The ripple effect was growing. Frank's neighborhood experiment had turned into a movement, and he couldn't ignore the power it held. But with this growing attention came a question: was he ready to take this to the next level? Frank knew one thing for sure: he had stumbled onto something that could change the course of aging for many. And now, he had a responsibility to see it through. Frank had never been one to shy away from a challenge, but this new phase of his journey was like nothing he had ever experienced. The phone calls were relentless now. Every day brought a new opportunity, a new request to speak at a conference, or an invitation to collaborate with experts from all over the country. Frank had gone from being a retiree quietly tinkering with his health to becoming a recognized figure in the wellness community. But as the attention grew, so did the pressure. Frank knew that he was standing at the precipice of something much bigger than himself. He had already seen the potential impact his findings could have on the senior community, but could he truly push this movement to the next level? Could he create a lasting, tangible change for the aging population, or would he falter under the weight of it all? It was a Tuesday afternoon when Frank received the invitation that changed everything, a speaking engagement at the National Aging Health and Wellness Conference in Chicago. The thought of standing before hundreds of professionals, health experts, and influencers from the wellness industry made his palms sweat. He had always been an introvert, more comfortable in his kitchen experimenting with recipes than speaking in front of a crowd. But this opportunity felt too important to pass up. After confirming his acceptance, Frank spent the next few days in overdrive, preparing his presentation. He knew his research was solid, he had the testimonials from his neighbors, the support of the Senior Health Network, and the results he had seen firsthand. But now, he needed to translate all of that into a compelling argument for a room full of skeptics. He spent hours perfecting the details, refining his message. He had to explain the science behind the foods, back up his claims with research, and most importantly, inspire others to take action. The night before the conference, Frank found himself pacing in his hotel room, rehearsing his speech out loud. His mind was racing, filled with both excitement and doubt. He was no longer just Frank from the neighborhood, he was Frank, the guy who had figured out how to fight aging with food. And now, he had to prove it. He glanced at the clock. It was already past midnight. As he stared at his notes, a small voice inside his head whispered, "What if they don't believe you? What if they laugh you off the stage?" But then, he remembered why he was doing this. He wasn't here for validation. He was here for the people who needed hope. For every senior out there who felt their body giving up on them, for everyone who believed the clock was already ticking too fast, he had to share what he had learned. Frank took a deep breath and looked at himself in the mirror. "You can do this," he whispered. The next morning, Frank stood backstage, watching as the speaker before him wrapped up their presentation. The hum of conversation in the room was palpable, a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Frank had to remind himself that he was there to share knowledge, not to convince anyone. He knew what he had seen, he knew what had worked for him. When his name was called, he walked to the stage, his heart pounding in his chest. The audience was large. Well over 500 people, most of them experts in geriatric medicine, nutritionists, and senior fitness advocates. They weren't easily impressed, and Frank could already feel the weight of their scrutiny. He took a deep breath, adjusted the microphone, and began. "I'd like to start by asking you a question," Frank began, his voice steady. "How many of you have ever felt that aging was something you couldn't fight? That it was inevitable, and that the decline was just a part of the process? I've felt that too. But what if I told you there's a way to not just slow down aging, but to reverse some of its effects?" There was a ripple of interest from the crowd, and Frank pressed on, explaining his journey. He talked about the years of feeling weak and tired, and how he discovered the potential of food to combat the physical effects of aging. He shared his findings on beets, lion's mane mushrooms, and their impact on muscle regeneration and brain health. "I'm not saying these foods are miracle cures," Frank continued, "but they can make a world of difference when we start looking at aging in a different way. Aging doesn't have to mean decline. It doesn't have to mean pain. We can fight back with the right foods." He then introduced scientific studies to back up his claims. Frank had done his research, and he made sure to present facts and studies that supported the benefits of the foods he had been eating. He wasn't just speaking from personal experience anymore, he had evidence to back it up. After his presentation, the room was silent for a moment before the questions began. "How do you know this works for everyone?" a voice from the back called out. "What about the people who don't have the same results?" Frank nodded, prepared for this. "That's a valid question. What I'm presenting here isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. But the feedback I've received from people in my community, along with the research I've done, shows that these foods can benefit most people, especially seniors. The key is consistency. It's not about an overnight miracle, it's about making small, sustainable changes. Another question came from the left side of the room. What do you recommend for those who can't access these specific foods? Frank smiled. Great question. While some of these foods might be harder to find, there are plenty of alternatives that can have similar effects. The goal is to incorporate nutrient-dense foods that support muscle function, cognitive health, and circulation. Even small changes can make a big difference. As Frank left the stage, he felt a mix of relief and exhilaration. He had done it. He had stood in front of an audience of experts and delivered his message. But now, the real work was beginning. He had opened the door, and it was up to him to push through it. The feedback from the audience was overwhelmingly positive. Some attendees even came up to Frank afterward, shaking his hand and asking for more information. It felt surreal. This had all started with a simple experiment in his kitchen, and now he was at the forefront of a movement. By the end of the day, Frank was already receiving invitations to collaborate on larger wellness initiatives. The momentum was building, and he could feel it. This was the start of something bigger than he had ever imagined. But there were still challenges ahead. As much as he had accomplished, Frank knew that this was just the beginning. He had to keep pushing. He had to stay focused, stay determined, and most importantly, stay true to his mission. He had begun this journey to help himself, but now, he was ready to help the world. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As Frank sat at his desk, staring at the dozens of emails and invitations that had flooded his inbox in the wake of his presentation at the National Aging Health and Wellness Conference, he realized that this was no longer just a passion project. His journey had evolved from a personal experiment into a full-fledged movement, one that had the potential to change the way seniors approached aging, forever. But with all the excitement came a sense of uncertainty. Frank was used to doing things on his own, quietly testing ideas in his kitchen and experimenting with new foods. Now, he had to navigate partnerships, negotiations, and an ever-expanding public presence. The thought of managing this level of attention was overwhelming, and the pressure was starting to weigh on him. Still, Frank knew one thing: he couldn't back down. He had seen firsthand how his findings were changing lives, how seniors were reclaiming their health and vitality, and how the food choices they made were directly impacting their strength and mental clarity. The movement had momentum, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. It wasn't long before Frank was contacted by a major wellness company, a company with a reputation for pushing the boundaries of health and fitness. They wanted to meet him. The meeting took place at a sleek office building in downtown Los Angeles, far from the quiet streets of Frank's neighborhood. As he walked into the conference room, he was greeted by a group of well-dressed executives who were eager to hear about his research. So, Frank, one of them, a tall man named Jordan, began. "We've been following your work closely, and we're impressed by what you've done so far. But we see a much bigger picture here. Your research could be the foundation for a groundbreaking new product line focused on senior wellness." Frank wasn't surprised by the offer. He had anticipated that someone would eventually want to commercialize his findings, but hearing it out loud made him pause. He had spent his life avoiding the corporate world, preferring to stay independent, but this was an opportunity that could take his work further than he could do alone. "I appreciate the interest," Frank said, sitting down at the table. "But I'm not interested in just selling a product. This isn't about making money, it's about helping people. I've seen the difference it's made in my community, and that's what matters to me. If we're going to partner, I want to make sure it's for the right reasons." Jordan nodded, acknowledging Frank's concerns. "We get that, Frank. But think about the scale. With our resources, we could help thousands, even millions of seniors. Together, we could create something that changes the game for aging." You've got the research, we've got the infrastructure. It's a perfect fit. Frank took a moment to consider the offer. He was drawn to the idea of making a real difference on a larger scale, but he had to ensure that his values and the mission he had started would remain intact. He didn't want to be part of something that simply profited off of people's health struggles. I need time to think about this, Frank said firmly. But I'll tell you this, if we do this, it has to be authentic. The products have to be genuinely beneficial to seniors, and we can't compromise the integrity of what I've already built. Jordan smiled. We can work with that. We believe in what you're doing, Frank. Take your time, but let's make this happen. As Frank left the meeting, he felt a mixture of excitement and caution. The partnership could provide him with the resources he needed to take his mission to new heights, but he knew the stakes were higher now. There was no turning back. Not everyone was on board with Frank's newfound visibility. A few weeks after the conference, Frank received a call from Charles, his old friend and the first person who had introduced him to the idea of using food to fight aging. Charles sounded troubled. Frank, we need to talk. I've been reading some of the articles about your recent work, and I'm starting to get worried, Charles said, his voice filled with concern. Worried? About what? Frank asked, perplexed. It's all this corporate stuff. Frank, I know you want to help people, but you're getting involved with companies that are just out for profit. They see you as a way to sell products, and they don't care about your message. I've seen this happen before, and it doesn't end well. Frank was taken aback. Charles had always been supportive, but this sounded different. You're saying I shouldn't take the partnership? Charles hesitated. I'm not saying that, Frank. But I think you need to be careful. There's a fine line between making an impact and getting caught up in the commercial side of things. Don't lose sight of why you started this. You've already done so much for your community, and I know you've changed lives. Just don't let them turn you into a product. Frank took a deep breath. He respected Charles and valued his opinion, but he couldn't deny the potential of what the partnership could offer. He wasn't in it for the money, but the resources, research, and outreach could make a significant difference. I hear you, Charles, Frank said, his voice steady. But I think I'm ready to take this to the next level. I'm not going to let it change my values, but I believe this could help more people than I ever could alone. The conversation with Charles left Frank in deep thought. He knew his next steps would determine the future of his mission, and he couldn't afford to make a misstep. There was still so much work to be done. Seniors needed hope, they needed practical tools, and they needed a change in how they viewed aging. Frank sat down at his desk and began drafting a new plan. If he was going to move forward with the partnership, he would need to set clear boundaries. He would demand transparency in the product development process and ensure that any product created was rooted in science, authenticity, and care for the seniors who would benefit from it. No shortcuts, no gimmicks. He would also continue his work on the grassroots level, keeping the connections with his neighbors and local community strong. He had to remain grounded in the very principles that had started his journey. It was time to break new ground, but on his terms. As the weeks passed, Frank's life grew busier. He balanced meetings with the wellness company, speaking engagements, and his ongoing research. The partnership moved forward, with Frank providing guidance on the kinds of products that could make the most difference for seniors. He stayed involved in every aspect of the process, ensuring that the mission remained intact. And as his reach expanded, Frank continued to see the ripple effect of his work. More seniors were getting involved, sharing their stories of improved health and vitality. Frank had become a symbol of hope, a beacon for anyone who thought that aging meant surrendering to weakness and decline. Now, he was more determined than ever to see his mission through. He had taken the first step into a larger world, and while the challenges ahead were great, he knew one thing for sure: there was no turning back. The buzz surrounding Frank's research had only grown since the announcement of his partnership with the wellness company. His email inbox was flooded daily with requests for interviews, speaking engagements, and collaboration opportunities. The response from seniors and their families was overwhelming. Frank's work had struck a chord, and people wanted to learn more, take action, and transform their lives. But with this success came new challenges. The scale of Frank's mission was expanding faster than he had anticipated. What had started as a personal exploration into the power of food had now become an industry movement, and Frank was right in the middle of it. There were more phone calls to take, more decisions to make, and more people to manage. It was no longer just Frank and his small group of trusted allies. Now, he had a team of researchers, marketers, and product developers working around the clock to bring his ideas to life. Every step he took felt monumental, as if he was laying the foundation for something that would define his legacy. One afternoon, as Frank sat in his office, his assistant, Julia, came in with a thick stack of documents. Frank rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the decisions ahead. He had spent the last few weeks reviewing product prototypes, ensuring they were aligned with his vision of accessible and genuinely beneficial foods for seniors. But there was a growing tension in the air. "Frank," Julia said, her voice hesitant, "there's a situation I think you need to address. Some of the senior advocates and wellness influencers we've been working with have raised concerns. They feel that the partnership with the wellness company is straying too far from the mission you started with. They're worried that the focus is becoming too commercial, too profit-driven." Frank sighed, his shoulders heavy. He knew this day would come. The deeper he got into the wellness industry, the more he would face conflicts with people who were genuinely passionate about the cause. But he also knew that without resources and infrastructure, his mission would remain small. Could he continue to help millions of seniors if he remained on the sidelines? Was this the price of success? "I knew this was going to happen," Frank said, staring out the window. "I can't lose sight of why I started this in the first place. It's not about the money, it's about changing lives. But I also need to make sure we have the means to do that." Julia nodded. "I think what they're asking is that you don't lose control of the narrative. You can still be a voice for seniors and their health while also partnering with larger companies. It's all about balance." That evening, Frank sat at his kitchen table, poring over the reports and documents Julia had given him. The wellness company's proposals were bold. They had plans to launch a new line of supplements, protein powders, and meal kits tailored for seniors. The products were well crafted, with a strong focus on the nutritional elements Frank had promoted. But as he read through the marketing strategies, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of discomfort. The product line would target the senior market with aggressive campaigns, ads everywhere, from social media platforms to television commercials. The wellness company had experience with mass marketing, and they wanted to push the products as quickly as possible. Frank knew that while this could bring more attention to his work, it also meant sacrificing some of the authenticity that had made his message resonate in the first place. It wasn't just about the products themselves, but about how they would be sold, how they would be positioned. Would they be marketed as a quick fix to aging, or would they continue to focus on long-term, sustainable health? Frank thought about the seniors he had met over the past year, the ones whose lives had truly been transformed by his work. They hadn't bought into the idea of a miracle cure. They had taken small, manageable steps toward improving their health, and those steps had led to lasting changes. Frank knew that his mission wasn't about selling products, it was about changing the mindset around aging, helping people embrace a new way of thinking about their health. After hours of deliberation, Frank made a decision. He wasn't going to let his mission be hijacked by corporate interests. If the wellness company truly believed in what he was doing, they would have to understand that the products couldn't just be about profit. They had to be a part of a broader movement, one that was rooted in real, science-backed solutions for seniors, not a marketing gimmick. The next morning, Frank called a meeting with the executives at the wellness company. He was clear about his concerns, and while he appreciated the resources they had brought to the table, he wasn't willing to compromise the integrity of his work. "I've thought about our partnership, and I think we need to reframe how we approach this," Frank said firmly. This can't just be about pushing products. This has to be about empowering seniors to take control of their health. I don't want to see these products turned into a marketing machine. We need to focus on education, long-term wellness, and the real, sustainable benefits these foods offer. The executives were quiet for a moment, absorbing Frank's words. Finally, Jordan, the tall man who had first approached Frank, spoke up. We understand, Frank, he said. We want to build something meaningful, not just sell a product. Let's go back to the drawing board and come up with a new plan that aligns with your vision. It was a relief. Frank had feared that his concerns would fall on deaf ears, but the response was encouraging. He wasn't just a spokesperson for a brand, he was still the leader of this movement. And now, the challenge was to ensure that his message was heard loud and clear. With the renewed focus on the mission, Frank continued to push forward. He worked closely with the wellness company to refine the products, ensuring they met the highest standards of quality and authenticity. Together, they launched a campaign focused on educating seniors about the power of food to prevent aging and boost health. Instead of focusing solely on sales, the marketing strategy centered around building a community, sharing success stories, and offering practical, science-backed tips for maintaining health well into old age. One afternoon, as Frank sat in his office, his assistant, Julia, came in with a thick stack of documents. Frank rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the decisions ahead. He had spent the last few weeks reviewing product prototypes, ensuring they were aligned with his vision of accessible and genuinely beneficial foods for seniors. But there was a growing tension in the air. Frank, Julia said, her voice hesitant, there's a situation I think you need to address. Some of the senior advocates and wellness influencers we've been working with have raised concerns. They feel that the partnership with the wellness company is straying too far from the mission you started with. They're worried that the focus is becoming too commercial, too profit-driven. Frank sighed, his shoulders heavy. He knew this day would come. The deeper he got into the wellness industry, the more he would face conflicts with people who were genuinely passionate about the cause. But he also knew that without resources and infrastructure, his mission would remain small. Could he continue to help millions of seniors if he remained on the sidelines? Was this the price of success? I knew this was going to happen, Frank said, staring out the window. I can't lose sight of why I started this in the first place. It's not about the money, it's about changing lives. But I also need to make sure we have the means to do that. Julia nodded. I think what they're asking is that you don't lose control of the narrative. You can still be a voice for seniors and their health while also partnering with larger companies. It's all about balance. That evening, Frank sat at his kitchen table, poring over the reports and documents Julia had given him. The wellness company's proposals were bold. They had plans to launch a new line of supplements, protein powders, and meal kits tailored for seniors. The products were well crafted, with a strong focus on the nutritional elements Frank had promoted. But as he read through the marketing strategies, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of discomfort. The product line would target the senior market with aggressive campaigns, ads everywhere, from social media platforms to television commercials. The wellness company had experience with mass marketing, and they wanted to push the products as quickly as possible. Frank knew that while this could bring more attention to his work, it also meant sacrificing some of the authenticity that had made his message resonate in the first place. It wasn't just about the products themselves, but about how they would be sold, how they would be positioned. Would they be marketed as a quick fix to aging, or would they continue to focus on long-term, sustainable health? Frank had always been wary of such tactics, and seeing his name attached to them made him uneasy. He picked up the phone and dialed Jordan. Hey, Jordan. We need to talk, Frank said, his voice steady but firm. I've been looking over the latest campaign, and I'm not happy with it. This isn't what we agreed on. It didn't take long for Jordan to arrive at Frank's office. Frank had always respected Jordan's enthusiasm and dedication, but today, he was feeling more like an advocate for his own vision than a partner in a growing business. Frank, I get that you're concerned, but the numbers we're seeing are huge. The products flying off the shelves, Jordan began, sitting down across from Frank. I don't care about the numbers, Frank said sharply. This isn't about sales, this is about the message we're sending. We're not selling a magic pill here. What we're offering is real change, but it's going to take time. I don't want to mislead people into thinking this is a shortcut to health. Jordan shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. I understand, but we're talking about reaching a mass audience here. People want quick fixes. That's what sells. I'm not in this for the quick sell, Frank replied. I didn't spend all this time researching and building this movement just to turn it into another marketing gimmick. We need to educate people, slow and steady. That's the only way this is going to last. There was a long pause. Jordan seemed to be weighing Frank's words carefully. You're right, Frank. We didn't get here by selling shortcuts. I'll make sure the campaign gets reworked to align more with your original vision. We'll put more emphasis on long-term benefits and real-life success stories, not just quick results. Frank nodded, relieved. Good. I'm glad we're on the same page. As Jordan left, Frank leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. This wasn't the first difficult conversation he'd had since starting this journey, but it was one of the most important. He had always known that the road to success wasn't going to be smooth, but it was in moments like this, where values were tested, that Frank realized just how crucial it was to stay grounded. The following weeks brought a wave of positive feedback. Frank's advocacy for slow, sustainable health practices resonated with his followers, especially the seniors who had been using his advice to make long-term changes in their lives. His message had always been one of empowerment, helping seniors take control of their own health, rather than depending on fleeting trends or quick-fix solutions. Now, more than ever, it seemed that people were beginning to understand the power of that message. But there were still obstacles to overcome. As Frank's influence grew, so did the scrutiny. Some critics, particularly from more traditional health circles, began to push back against his ideas. They questioned the effectiveness of his food-focused approach, citing the dangers of relying solely on diet for health and longevity. Frank had expected this. In any field, innovation was met with resistance, and his work was no different. He wasn't just promoting a new product, he was challenging long-standing beliefs about aging, nutrition, and wellness. He was asking people to reconsider everything they thought they knew about their bodies and their health. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight. One evening, while preparing dinner in his kitchen, Frank thought back to his early days of research. He had started with a few simple questions. Can food really impact aging? Can seniors regain muscle strength and vitality with the right diet? The more he dug, the more he realized how much conventional wisdom had failed to account for the power of nutrition. But that wasn't just a scientific breakthrough, it was a philosophical one. He had learned that aging didn't have to mean inevitable decline. It didn't have to mean becoming weak, frail, and dependent. Food, combined with the right mindset, could change everything. And that, Frank knew, was his true legacy. But with this understanding came a new challenge: how could he ensure his message reached the seniors who needed it most? The wellness industry was a crowded space, filled with countless products and programs promising quick results. Frank had to stay focused on what mattered: the long-term health of seniors, the transformative power of food, and the importance of sustainable lifestyle changes. As the days passed, Frank continued to focus on his research, speaking engagements, and community outreach. He kept working on refining the product line, but always with an eye on his original goal: helping seniors reclaim their strength. His work had touched thousands, but Frank knew the battle wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. More than ever, Frank understood that his real legacy wouldn't be the products he helped create, but the lives he changed. If he could inspire a shift in how the world viewed aging, if he could help seniors everywhere see their potential rather than their limitations, then he had succeeded. One morning, Frank woke up to a message from an elderly woman named Clara, who had been following his work for the past several months. She wrote that after making simple changes to her diet, she felt stronger, more energized, and had even started exercising again. Clara thanked Frank for showing her that aging wasn't something to fear, it was something to embrace, to work with, and to fight against with everything she had. That message brought a smile to Frank's face. It reminded him why he had started this journey in the first place. He had always believed that aging didn't have to be a downhill spiral, and now, he was seeing proof of that belief every day. The work was far from finished, but Frank knew that with each person he helped, with each life he touched, he was moving closer to his ultimate goal, to create a world where seniors were strong, empowered, and, most importantly, hopeful. The early morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of Frank's office, casting long shadows across the room. He had always been a morning person, but today, he felt the weight of the world pressing down on him more than usual. The emails, the meetings, the constant juggling of priorities, it was all starting to wear him down. Despite the success of his wellness campaign, the path forward was becoming less clear. Frank had spent the last few months refining the wellness products and working with his team to ensure they aligned with his mission. But something was nagging at him. The message, which had once been crystal clear, now felt diluted. He had always emphasized the importance of holistic health, teaching people to improve their diet and incorporate regular exercise into their lives. But the growing commercial pressures were pushing him into unfamiliar territory. It wasn't just the marketing campaigns, the board meetings, or the public appearances. It was the underlying question that Frank had avoided for too long: was his message being lost in all the noise? Just as Frank was grappling with these doubts, a new wave of criticism surfaced. A prominent health expert, Dr. Stephen Montgomery, a well-respected figure in the medical community, publicly challenged Frank's approach in an interview. Dr. Montgomery, who had spent decades studying aging, was skeptical of the claims Frank had made about food as a tool for combating the effects of aging. Frank's approach is based on the idea that we can reverse the inevitable decline of aging through diet alone, Dr. Montgomery argued on a popular health podcast. This idea is dangerous and misleading. Aging is a natural process, and while a healthy diet is important, it cannot stop the biological clock. Frank's products prey on people's fears and promises unrealistic results. The interview went viral, and the backlash was swift. Critics on social media began attacking Frank's work, accusing him of pushing pseudoscience and misleading seniors into believing that a few food changes could transform their health overnight. Frank watched the clip of Dr. Montgomery's interview multiple times, feeling a knot grow tighter in his stomach. The worst part wasn't that someone was questioning his methods, it was that his message, which had always been rooted in science, was being misrepresented. He knew he had to act fast. If this went unchecked, it could undo everything he had worked for. His entire mission, his movement, was now in jeopardy. Within hours, Frank organized a press conference to address the mounting criticism. He knew that he couldn't afford to stay silent. This was a battle for the truth, and he wasn't about to let his message be distorted. The room was packed with reporters, cameras flashing as Frank walked up to the podium. His palms were sweaty, but he held his head high. He had been preparing for this moment his entire career. He knew how to speak to the public, to engage with the media, to stand his ground when it mattered most. "Good morning, everyone," Frank began, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "I'm here today to clear the air. There's been a lot of misinformation floating around regarding my work, and I want to address it directly." He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. "The core of my research, and the foundation of my message, is simple: diet and exercise are crucial components in maintaining health as we age. Aging is not a disease. It's a natural process. But that doesn't mean we should resign ourselves to the inevitable decline that many associate with getting older." The reporters listened intently as Frank continued. "The products I've helped develop, and the advice I give to seniors, are rooted in science. There's a growing body of research that shows food can impact the aging process. Certain foods, nutrient-dense and rich in antioxidants, can help maintain muscle strength, bone density, and cognitive function as we age. He made eye contact with the cameras. What I'm offering is not a cure for aging. It's a chance for seniors to live healthier, longer lives by taking control of their nutrition. My work is about empowerment, not false promises. It's about giving people the tools to fight the physical decline that often comes with aging. Frank could feel the tension in the room begin to shift. He had spoken from the heart, without defensiveness, and the message had resonated with the crowd. But he knew this wouldn't be the end of the battle. Dr. Montgomery's words were powerful, and the skepticism wouldn't disappear overnight. The days that followed the press conference were tense. The media coverage was a mix of support and skepticism. Some outlets praised Frank for his transparency and honesty, while others continued to question his methods. It was clear that the controversy had given Frank's mission more visibility, but it also exposed cracks in his credibility that would need to be repaired. Frank leaned heavily on his core team for support during this time. Julia, his assistant, was a steady presence, keeping him grounded when the stress of the situation threatened to overwhelm him. His lead researcher, Dr. Elisa Chang, worked tirelessly to compile more studies and data that could back up Frank's claims. Together, they prepared a comprehensive report that would be sent to the media, the critics, and anyone willing to listen. Meanwhile, Frank continued his public appearances, speaking directly to seniors and advocating for the lifestyle changes he believed in. Slowly but surely, he began to regain the trust of his audience. His message of empowerment resonated more deeply than ever before. Seniors were sharing their success stories, their transformations, their renewed energy. Frank knew that the truth was on his side, and it would ultimately prevail. Months passed, and the controversy surrounding Frank's work began to fade. The skeptics had moved on to the next sensational story, but Frank's mission had only grown stronger. His focus had always been on the people he was trying to help, not the critics or the noise around him. As long as he kept his eyes on the goal, he knew he would be able to push through any obstacle. One evening, as Frank sat at his desk, reflecting on the journey so far, he received an unexpected email from Dr. Stephen Montgomery. The subject line read, "Let's talk." Frank hesitated before opening it. The email was brief but to the point. "Frank, after further reflection on your approach and the data you've shared, I'd like to have a conversation. I've been following your work closely, and I believe there's more to what you're doing than I initially understood. Can we set up a meeting?" Frank's heart skipped a beat. He had expected this battle to last much longer, but perhaps this was the breakthrough he had been hoping for. Maybe it wasn't just about proving the critics wrong. It was about finding common ground, bringing the scientific community together, and strengthening the credibility of his message. He immediately hit reply. "Yes, Dr. Montgomery. I'd be happy to meet." As Frank awaited the meeting with Dr. Montgomery, he realized how much he had learned over the past few months. The road to success had never been easy. There had been moments of doubt, personal sacrifice, and intense pressure. But each challenge had made him stronger, and had pushed him closer to his ultimate goal. The mission was bigger than one person, bigger than a product line or a wellness brand. It was about shifting the way the world saw aging and showing people that there was so much more to life than what they had been told. Aging wasn't a sentence, it was a new chapter. And Frank was determined to help as many people as he could write their own stories. It had been a few weeks since Frank's conversation with Dr. Montgomery. The media storm had settled, and things were beginning to return to normal, well, as normal as things could be for someone with Frank's newfound visibility. But Frank wasn't one to rest on his laurels. He had a larger vision now, his work was far from over, and he knew he had the power to reach even more people, seniors in particular, who could benefit from his research. One morning, as Frank sat in his office, reviewing the latest updates on his product line, a notification popped up on his phone. It was an email from a well-known tech company, Tesla. Frank blinked. Tesla? Curious, he opened the email, which was from none other than Elon Musk himself. Subject, exploring a partnership opportunity. Dear Frank, I've been following your work on aging, nutrition, and wellness for a while now. I'm intrigued by your mission and the potential for technology to enhance people's quality of life, especially as we age. I believe there's a unique opportunity here to explore a partnership between Tesla and your wellness initiative. Let's set up a time to discuss how we might collaborate on a project that combines cutting-edge technology with your expertise in nutrition and aging. I'm excited about the possibilities. Best regards. Elon Musk. Frank stared at the screen, his mind racing. A partnership with Tesla? He had to be dreaming. He'd always admired Elon Musk for his innovations, his boldness, and his passion for making the world a better place. The idea of collaborating with someone like Musk was both thrilling and intimidating. After taking a deep breath, Frank replied to the email, accepting the offer to meet. He knew this could be a game changer, but he also understood the importance of staying true to his principles. He had built his reputation on science and integrity, and he wasn't about to let that slip away for the sake of a lucrative partnership. A week later, Frank found himself walking through the sleek, futuristic offices of Tesla's headquarters. The atmosphere was electric, a testament to the company's innovation and cutting-edge work. He was led into a spacious conference room where Elon Musk was already seated, his trademark casual style, black t-shirt and jeans, giving him an approachable vibe. Frank, great to finally meet you in person, Elon said, standing up to shake Frank's hand. I've been following your work for a while, and I think what you're doing is incredible. We need to get more people thinking about aging in a completely different way. That's why I wanted to meet. Frank felt a surge of energy at the compliment, but he didn't let it distract him. Thank you, Elon. I appreciate your interest. I've always believed that food and exercise are the key to aging well. But it's also about mindset. The challenge, though, is that many seniors don't have access to the right tools or information to make lasting changes. Elon leaned forward, his eyes sharp with curiosity. Exactly. We're working on some exciting technologies at Tesla, particularly in the realm of artificial intelligence and bioengineering. Imagine a world where we can combine advanced tech with your research to help seniors live healthier, longer lives. What if we could create a system that not only tracks a person's nutrition but also provides personalized recommendations based on their unique biology? Frank's mind began to race. The possibilities were endless. That's a fascinating idea, he said. We've always known that personalized nutrition is the future, but to have technology that actually tailors advice based on an individual's needs? That could be a game changer. Elon smiled. Exactly. I'm thinking something along the lines of a wearable device that uses data to monitor things like muscle mass, hydration levels, and nutrient deficiencies. This data could then sync with a mobile app to provide real-time recommendations for nutrition, exercise, and lifestyle changes, all tailored to that person's specific needs. Frank's heart raced. This was the kind of collaboration he had always dreamed of. With Tesla's expertise in cutting-edge technology and his own knowledge of nutrition and aging, they could create something revolutionary. Over the next few hours, the two of them brainstormed ideas, discussing how they could combine Frank's nutrition expertise with Tesla's innovative tech. They talked about everything from personalized meal plans delivered to seniors' homes, to AI-driven systems that would help seniors exercise safely and effectively. Elon was especially passionate about integrating Tesla's advanced energy technologies, like solar-powered devices, into their wellness products, ensuring that even the most vulnerable people could benefit from sustainable and eco-friendly solutions. As the meeting drew to a close, Elon outlined a proposal for Frank. I want you to lead this project, Elon said, his tone serious. We'll provide the tech, the resources, and the infrastructure. You'll be in charge of the research and product development. Together, we'll create a platform that brings real, science-backed health solutions to seniors across the globe. Frank felt a lump form in his throat. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. But he knew that with such a partnership came immense responsibility. The stakes were higher than ever. He wasn't just responsible for his own message now, he would be representing a giant in the tech industry, one of the most influential companies in the world. "I'm honored, Elon," Frank said, his voice steady. "But I have one condition: we do this right. No shortcuts. We prioritize science, integrity, and the well-being of seniors. I want to make sure that everything we do is based on solid research, not just marketing." Elon nodded, clearly impressed by Frank's unwavering commitment. "You have my word. We're in this together, Frank. Let's make a real difference." As Frank left Tesla's headquarters that afternoon, he couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. This was the kind of partnership he had always dreamed about. The perfect combination of technology and science, with a shared commitment to improving lives. But he also knew that with this new opportunity came new challenges. Frank was entering uncharted territory. The scope of this project was massive, and he would have to navigate the complexities of working with a global tech company. But despite the challenges, Frank felt more determined than ever to stay true to his mission. He had always believed that food and fitness could change lives, and now, with the power of technology at his side, he had the opportunity to make that belief a reality for millions of seniors worldwide. As he drove home, Frank thought about the future. There were still so many hurdles to overcome, so much work to do. But with the right partnerships, the right mindset, and a commitment to science and integrity, Frank knew that he could create a world where aging wasn't something to fear, it was something to embrace. It had been 3 months since Frank's meeting with Elon Musk at Tesla. The initial excitement of the partnership had started to give way to the reality of the massive project that lay ahead. Frank had assembled a team of researchers, nutritionists, and engineers, and they were working tirelessly to develop the technology that would merge his knowledge of aging with Tesla's expertise in innovation. But as with any groundbreaking project, the road wasn't as smooth as Frank had hoped. There were disagreements about the direction of the product, technological setbacks, and the constant pressure to meet deadlines. Frank had to keep his focus sharp, reminding himself that the goal was still the same: to provide seniors with the tools they needed to live healthier, longer lives. It wasn't just about creating the technology, it was about making sure that it would truly work, that it would make a real difference for people. One of the biggest challenges was integrating the wearable tech with personalized nutrition recommendations. Frank had envisioned a seamless, easy-to-use device that would provide real-time feedback on a senior's health, giving them simple, actionable advice on how to improve their diet and exercise routine. But Tesla's engineers were more focused on pushing the limits of technology, adding features that, while impressive, were increasingly complicated and expensive. "Frank, we need to make this more scalable," one of the lead engineers, Claire, said during one of their brainstorming sessions. "The tech has to be more intuitive. The wearable should be able to predict things like a person's future health risks and offer real-time solutions." Frank rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the conversation. He understood the desire to create cutting-edge technology, but he was adamant that the product needed to be simple enough for seniors to use without feeling overwhelmed. "I get it," Frank said, trying to keep his frustration in check. "But we can't complicate things. The goal is to improve lives, not create another gadget. We need to focus on what's actually going to make a difference in people's daily lives." Claire didn't seem convinced, but she nodded. "I understand. We'll work on simplifying things." As the discussion continued, Frank felt a sense of unease. Tesla was all about pushing boundaries, but his mission was about practicality and accessibility. It was becoming clear that he would need to keep a tight grip on the project's vision to ensure it didn't lose its focus. In the midst of these technical challenges, Frank received a call from Elon Musk himself. Elon had been mostly hands-off in the day-to-day development of the product, letting Frank and his team take the reins. But now, it seemed, Elon wanted to check in. "Frank," Elon said when he answered the phone, "I've been thinking a lot about where we're going with this project. I want to make sure we're staying true to your original vision. Tell me, what's really important to you here?" Frank hesitated, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. Elon, it's about simplicity and usability. We're building something that's meant to change lives, not overwhelm people. If it's too complicated or too tech-heavy, seniors won't use it. They need something that's straightforward, that they can integrate into their lives without frustration. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. You're right, Elon said finally. I've been so focused on the tech aspect that I may have lost sight of what we're really trying to do. Let's go back to basics, make it simple, but effective. Let's build something that people will actually want to use, not just something that looks cool. Frank felt a wave of relief wash over him. Thanks, Elon. That's exactly what I've been trying to say. We need to make sure that the tech supports the mission, not the other way around. Agreed, Elon replied. Let's recalibrate. We'll meet next week and review everything. Let's make sure we're on the same page moving forward. A few weeks later, after reworking the design and focusing on the core elements of the product, the team finally arrived at a prototype that Frank was excited about. The wearable device was sleek, simple, and packed with essential features that seniors could easily understand and use. It tracked key health metrics like muscle mass, hydration, and heart rate, while offering personalized nutritional recommendations based on the data collected. The real breakthrough, however, came when the app integrated with a new, AI-powered assistant that Frank and his team had developed. The assistant would not only offer daily suggestions for exercise and nutrition but also check in with the user regularly to offer encouragement and motivation. It was the kind of personalized touch that Frank had always wanted, technology that made a difference without being intrusive or complicated. Elon was impressed when he saw the new prototype. This is it, Frank. This is exactly what we need. It's simple, it's effective, and it has the potential to change millions of lives. Frank smiled. It's been a long road, but we're getting there. With the prototype ready, Frank and his team began testing it with a select group of seniors. The initial feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Seniors reported feeling more energized and motivated to stick to their exercise and nutrition plans. The wearable device helped them stay on track, offering reminders to stay hydrated and keep moving. More importantly, it gave them the tools to take control of their health in a way they never thought possible. Frank was overjoyed by the results. This was the moment he had been working for, the moment when all the hard work, the setbacks, the frustrations, and the doubts began to pay off. He was seeing firsthand the impact his product was having on people's lives, and it fueled his determination to take things even further. As the project gained traction, Frank began to see something even more profound happening. His message about the importance of nutrition and exercise as we age started to spread far beyond his initial audience. Seniors were sharing their success stories online, posting about how they were feeling stronger, healthier, and more confident. The conversations weren't just about products, they were about mindset, empowerment, and the possibility of aging differently. It was clear that this wasn't just a tech product, it was part of a movement. Frank's vision was coming to life in ways he hadn't even anticipated. Elon's vision for using Tesla's technology to help change the world was resonating with people on a deep level. And Frank was proud to be part of that mission. As Frank sat in his office late one evening, looking over the data from the first phase of the project, he reflected on how far he had come. Just a year ago, he had been an unknown advocate for aging wellness, but now, with the help of a technology giant, he was on the brink of something bigger than he had ever imagined. There were still challenges ahead, but Frank knew that this was just the beginning. Together with Tesla, he was poised to change the way the world viewed aging. And with each new breakthrough, he knew that the impact of his work would continue to grow, reaching more and more seniors who deserved to live healthier, happier lives. The horizon was bright. And Frank was ready to seize it. The months leading up to the global launch of Frank's new wellness product felt like a whirlwind. After perfecting the prototype with Elon Musk's team at Tesla, they had reached a critical point. It was time to introduce the world to the future of senior wellness. The device was ready, the app was fully functional, and the backing of Tesla's technological prowess gave the project the credibility it needed. Frank sat at his desk, looking over the launch plans with his team. There were so many moving parts: marketing, distribution, global partnerships, and the critical issue of educating people on how to use the product. Seniors, Frank knew, could be apprehensive about new technology. The challenge was making sure they didn't feel intimidated by the wearable or the app. It had to be simple, intuitive, and, most importantly, accessible. As he scrolled through the documents, a notification popped up on his phone. It was from Elon. Subject: Global Rollout Strategy. Frank, we're about to go big with this launch. I want you to be prepared. This isn't just about selling a product. It's about shifting the way the world thinks about aging. We're going to make a statement. We'll have a press conference in New York in 2 weeks. Prepare for an audience of global media, investors, and influencers. Let's show them what we've built. I'll be there to help you lead the charge. Elon. Frank leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath. A press conference in New York, this was it. The moment he had been working toward for so long. He'd been thinking about this day ever since he had started his research. He wanted to show the world that aging could be a time of empowerment, not decline. But now that the moment was approaching, the pressure was mounting. He couldn't afford to let down the millions of seniors counting on this innovation to change their lives. The day of the global press conference arrived faster than Frank had expected. He found himself backstage at a high-profile venue in New York City, surrounded by Tesla executives and a handful of journalists. Elon Musk was at his side, offering words of encouragement as they prepared to take the stage. "You've got this, Frank," Elon said, clapping him on the back. "This is more than just a product launch. This is the beginning of something that will change lives. Focus on your message. Let them see the vision." Frank nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. He had always been comfortable talking about his research, but this was different. This was global, and the eyes of the world were on him. As the lights dimmed and the crowd settled, Frank walked onto the stage with Elon by his side. The cameras flashed, and the buzz of anticipation filled the air. Frank could feel the weight of the moment, but he pushed past the nerves and focused on the mission. "Elon, thank you for joining me today," Frank began, his voice steady. "I'm here to talk about something that is truly close to my heart. We've been working tirelessly to create a product that will change the way we think about aging. For too long, society has treated aging as something to fear, something to avoid. But the truth is, aging doesn't have to mean slowing down. It doesn't have to mean giving up. In fact, it can be a time of empowerment." He paused, letting the words sink in. He looked out over the audience, filled with journalists and influencers who were eager for the next big thing. This device, this system, isn't just about technology. It's about health. It's about well-being. It's about helping seniors live healthier, longer, and more fulfilling lives. We've combined cutting-edge technology with proven science to offer personalized health recommendations, tailored to each individual's unique needs. As Frank spoke, he could see the audience becoming more engaged. They were listening, nodding, and absorbing the message. He felt a sense of relief. This was going to work. This wasn't just a product, this was a movement. After the press conference, the media buzzed with excitement. The product was featured in news outlets around the world, from major newspapers to tech blogs, and social media exploded with interest. Seniors began sharing their experiences, posting about how the wearable had helped them regain energy, improve their diet, and get stronger. There were even testimonials from doctors and healthcare providers praising the product for its potential to transform senior wellness. But as the product gained traction, Frank realized that success wasn't just about the tech, it was about the connections it fostered. He was receiving messages from seniors all over the world, sharing their stories of improved health and newfound confidence. This was the true reward, the opportunity to make a real, lasting impact on people's lives. Elon had been right when he said this wasn't just about a product, it was about shifting the way people thought about aging. Seniors were beginning to realize that they didn't have to accept the idea of aging as inevitable decline. They had the power to take control of their health, to push back against the conventional narrative of aging as something to be feared. The product's success wasn't just measured in units sold or media coverage, it was in the messages of gratitude Frank received every day from people whose lives were being changed. And as Frank read through these messages, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. This was what he had been working toward all along. The launch had been a success, but Frank knew that the real work was just beginning. The global demand for the product was growing, and there were still challenges ahead. He needed to scale production, ensure quality control, and expand the app's features to meet the diverse needs of seniors around the world. But for the first time in a long while, Frank felt a sense of optimism about the future. He had built something that mattered. He had created a tool that could make a profound difference in people's lives. As he sat in his office, reviewing the latest updates on the product's success, Frank looked out the window at the bustling city below. The world was changing, and he was part of that change. He had always believed in the power of science, technology, and nutrition to help people live better lives. And now, with the backing of Tesla and a global platform, Frank's vision was coming to life in ways he had never imagined. The horizon was filled with possibilities. And Frank was ready to take on whatever came next. The excitement from the global launch of Frank's wellness product was still fresh, but reality quickly set in. The demand for the device was overwhelming. Tens of thousands of seniors from around the world had already signed up to receive it, and orders were pouring in daily. What started as a small-scale, tech-driven solution to a common problem had evolved into a global movement. Now, Frank found himself grappling with the complexities of scaling up production and maintaining the level of quality and customer care that had made the product a success in the first place. The challenge was bigger than he had anticipated. Sitting in a meeting with the leadership team, Frank reviewed the production and logistics reports. The numbers were staggering. There were backlogs in manufacturing, delays in shipping, and the strain on the customer service team was palpable. "We're behind schedule," said Claire, the lead engineer, flipping through the data on her tablet. "The factories can't keep up with the demand. We need to streamline production or we'll lose momentum." Frank leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He had always known that scaling would come with its own set of challenges, but the pressure was starting to feel suffocating. The last thing he wanted was to disappoint the seniors who had already trusted him with their health and well-being. "We can't afford to compromise on quality," Frank said, his voice steady but firm. "We've come this far by staying true to our mission. If we try to rush this, we'll sacrifice everything we've worked for." There was a quiet agreement around the table. The team had always operated with the same mindset, slow and steady, focusing on doing things right rather than doing them fast. But now, they were faced with the dilemma of balancing speed with quality. The first major issue Frank's team faced was a bottleneck in production. While the wearable device had been tested and refined, scaling up the manufacturing process was far more complicated. The factory in California, which had originally been designed to produce smaller quantities, was struggling to meet the increased demand. The assembly lines were at full capacity, and the workers were working overtime, but it still wasn't enough. Frank had to make a decision: either find additional manufacturing partners or push the existing factory to increase its capacity. While the idea of bringing in new partners sounded appealing, it also posed a risk. Frank had spent months working with the current factory to ensure that the devices met the high standards he had set. If they brought in new manufacturers, he would lose control over the process. "I think it's time to look at expanding our manufacturing partners," Claire suggested. "If we want to stay ahead of the competition, we'll need to diversify production." Frank considered the option, but he couldn't shake the fear that it might cause more problems. "We'll need to be very careful. We're not just making a product, we're delivering a promise. I don't want to risk that by cutting corners." After a few tense moments, Frank made the decision to look for additional partners. But he would do so with strict quality control measures in place to ensure that any new manufacturer met the same high standards. The second major issue was logistics. With orders coming from all over the world, coordinating shipments became a logistical nightmare. The team was working around the clock to handle international shipping, but customs delays, tariffs, and regional regulations were creating constant setbacks. Frank was receiving complaints from customers who had been waiting for weeks for their devices to arrive. "We need to streamline this process," Frank said, after reading through a particularly troubling customer service report. "We can't keep asking our customers to wait this long. If we want to build trust, we need to fix the shipping delays immediately." Elon had always been adamant about the importance of customer satisfaction. "Frank, I've been thinking about this," Elon said during one of their calls. "What if we partner with a global logistics company that has the infrastructure to handle large volumes of shipments? We need someone who understands the scale we're dealing with." It was a solid idea, and Frank was relieved to know that Elon was thinking of practical solutions. They quickly reached out to a leading global logistics company that specialized in tech products. After several rounds of discussions and negotiations, the company agreed to take on the global distribution, ensuring that orders would be processed more efficiently and delivered on time. As the team scrambled to deal with the production and logistics issues, Frank's attention turned to another important area: customer service. Seniors, in particular, required extra assistance when it came to setting up the device, navigating the app, and understanding how to maximize its benefits. The customer service team, though dedicated, was overwhelmed with calls and inquiries. Frank knew that if they didn't find a solution fast, they would lose the goodwill they had earned. He gathered his leadership team for a strategy session. "We need to invest in more training for our customer service team, and we need to make the support process easier for seniors. We can't expect them to navigate a complicated help center. Let's create easy-to-follow video tutorials, have a live chat support option, and make sure we have people available for phone support around the clock." It wasn't the most glamorous solution, but Frank knew it was necessary. With seniors relying on the product for their health, he couldn't afford to cut corners when it came to customer care. Within weeks, the support system had been revamped, and the results were immediate. Customers began reporting faster responses and more personalized assistance, improving their overall satisfaction. As the weeks passed, Frank began to see the fruits of his labor. The production delays started to ease, logistics improved, and customer satisfaction was on the rise. While there were still challenges, Frank knew that the hardest part of scaling up was behind him. But as he sat in his office, reviewing the numbers and reflecting on the journey, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. What had started as a small idea, one that combined his passion for wellness with his desire to make a real difference in the world, had grown into something far beyond his expectations. Elon's vision for revolutionizing aging was becoming a reality, and Frank's mission to help seniors live better lives was resonating with people all over the world. "I'm proud of what we've done," Frank said to Claire, who was sitting across from him in the office. "But we can't stop here. This is just the beginning." Claire smiled, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Agreed. Let's keep pushing. We've got a lot more to do." Frank's office had become an unexpected sanctuary. Each day, he received dozens of emails, social media posts, and letters from seniors around the world, sharing how his product had improved their lives. There was something incredibly fulfilling about reading their stories of newfound vitality, strength, and independence. One email, in particular, stood out. It was from a woman named Margaret, who lived in a small town in Maine. She had been using the device for several months, and her story was nothing short of remarkable. Subject: A new lease on life. Dear Frank, I don't know where to start. I'm 78 years old, and for the last 5 years, I've struggled with my health. My joints hurt, my energy levels were low, and I thought my best days were behind me. But then, I found your product. In just 3 months, I feel like a new person. I've regained mobility, I'm sleeping better, and I have the energy to take care of my garden again. For the first time in years, I don't feel like an old woman. I feel like I'm finally in control of my life again. Thank you, Frank. You've given me a second chance. Sincerely. Margaret Johnson. Frank sat back in his chair, staring at the screen. Margaret's words hit him harder than he expected. This was more than just a product, it was giving people back the one thing they valued most, their independence. Frank had always been passionate about wellness, but reading this email made him realize the depth of what he had created. He had been so focused on the logistics and the scale of the project that he hadn't fully absorbed the human impact of his work. The world was waking up to the idea that aging didn't have to be a slow decline. With the right tools, support, and mindset, seniors could thrive, no matter their age. Frank shared the email with his team, and they were equally moved. Stories like Margaret's were becoming more and more common. It was clear that they were on the verge of something truly transformative. Their product wasn't just a technological innovation, it was a revolution. As Frank's product gained momentum, the health and wellness industry began to take notice. Senior-focused fitness programs, supplements, and health services were now being re-evaluated, as more attention was being placed on empowering seniors to take control of their own health. The world was finally beginning to understand that aging could be a time of vitality, not vulnerability. Frank was invited to speak at wellness conferences and health summits around the world. His message of senior empowerment resonated with audiences, and his product became a cornerstone in a new approach to aging. Researchers and health experts began reaching out, eager to collaborate and explore how technology could continue to enhance the lives of seniors. In one memorable interview, Frank was asked about the broader implications of his product. "Frank, your product has been a game changer for so many seniors. But what's next? Where do you see this industry heading in the next 5 to 10 years? Frank smiled, leaning into the microphone. "We're just scratching the surface. What we're seeing now is a shift in mindset. Aging no longer has to be seen as a time of decline, it can be a time of growth, discovery, and empowerment. Technology, when used right, can support seniors in living the life they want, not just the life they're told they have to live." This product is a part of that shift. But the real revolution will come when we start looking at aging from a holistic perspective, nutrition, fitness, mental health, and technology all working together to help seniors thrive. Frank's words resonated not only with the interviewers but also with the wider public. The idea of a senior revolution, an era in which people embraced their aging years with vigor and strength, began to take hold. Health magazines, blogs, and podcasts began covering stories about the success of the product, and soon, it was being featured in major publications like Forbes and the New York Times. The wellness industry was shifting its focus, and Frank had become a key player in this transformation. More companies started looking at the potential of products tailored to seniors, not just for improving their health but for enhancing their overall quality of life. Despite the rapid success of his company, Frank found himself facing his own personal challenge. As the months passed and the demands of scaling up the business grew, Frank began to feel the weight of the work. Long days, endless meetings, and constant travel had taken a toll on his health. He wasn't eating as well as he should, wasn't sleeping enough, and had little time for exercise. He was becoming a victim of the very thing he had created his product to prevent. One morning, after a particularly grueling week, Frank woke up feeling drained. He glanced at himself in the bathroom mirror and noticed that his posture was slumped, his face was pale, and his eyes had that tired look he had seen so many times in others. For a moment, he felt disconnected from his mission. Was he so focused on helping others that he had neglected his own well-being? As he sat down to drink his morning coffee, Frank received another email. This one was from a colleague he had known for years, Dr. Emily Carter, a well-known expert in aging and wellness. Subject: a friendly reminder. Hey Frank. I wanted to remind you of something important. Your health is just as important as the work you're doing for others. I know you're passionate about this mission, but remember that you can't help others if you're running on empty. Maybe it's time to take your own advice. Let me know if you need anything. You've got a lot of people who care about you and want to see you succeed, not just in business, but in life. Take care. Emily. Frank sat back, absorbing Emily's words. She was right. He had been so focused on scaling his company and meeting the needs of seniors worldwide that he had forgotten one crucial thing: he had to take care of himself first. After all, how could he lead a revolution in senior wellness if he wasn't living it himself? He made a decision that day: it was time to prioritize his health, the way he had been encouraging others to do. He would go back to the basics: eat well, sleep better, and make time for fitness. As he took a deep breath and felt the weight of the decision lift, Frank realized that this was the next step in his journey. The senior revolution wasn't just about technology or business, it was about holistic well-being for everyone, including himself. Frank woke up early that morning, not to check emails or review production reports, but to do something he hadn't done in months: exercise. It had been a long time since he had felt the satisfaction of a good workout, the kind that cleared his mind and made him feel energized for the day ahead. But today was different. Today, he was committed to taking care of himself. The first step in his new routine was simple: a morning walk around his neighborhood. Frank had always loved nature, but lately, he hadn't had much time to appreciate it. As he stepped outside, the cool morning air hit his face, and for the first time in weeks, he took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his decision to change. Start small, Frank muttered to himself. It wasn't about running a marathon today, but about establishing a sustainable habit. He walked slowly at first, savoring the peace around him. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft glow over the trees and houses. It was the kind of morning that reminded him of how important it was to slow down every once in a while. As Frank walked, his mind wandered back to the emails and messages he had received from seniors all over the world. The product had transformed lives, yes, but Frank's own life had taken a back seat. He was guilty of not walking the talk he so passionately preached. He thought about his own aging process. Frank wasn't exactly old, but he was getting older. At 45, he was beginning to feel the aches and pains of aging. His metabolism wasn't what it used to be, his energy levels were inconsistent, and his body was showing signs of wear from years of neglect. It was a reminder that the same approach that worked for seniors in his program had to work for him, too. This wasn't just about physical health, it was about taking care of his mind and spirit as well. The world had always seen Frank as a visionary, a tech genius who could change the course of history. But now, he was starting to understand that true revolution starts from within. He wasn't just leading a wellness movement for seniors, he was now part of that movement, too. It didn't take long for Frank to realize that in order to make his health journey sustainable, he would need more than just physical activity. Diet played a major role in how he felt, both mentally and physically. He'd heard the term, "you are what you eat," many times before, but now it felt more relevant than ever. He had been so focused on the big picture that he had neglected the simple, yet crucial, aspects of wellness. He thought back to the 3 foods that had been highlighted in his product's wellness plan, foods that Elon Musk had emphasized in their early discussions. These weren't just foods for seniors, they were for anyone who wanted to maintain strength, energy, and vitality well into old age. Frank grabbed his phone and pulled up the document where he had outlined the 3 foods that had been integral to the senior wellness program. They were simple, unassuming foods, yet packed with nutrients. 1. Berries, antioxidant powerhouses. Berries, particularly blueberries, were packed with antioxidants that help combat oxidative stress, a key factor in aging. They were known to improve brain health, reduce inflammation, and protect against cognitive decline. Frank had always loved berries but had never considered their potential as a powerful tool for maintaining brain function. 2. Leafy greens, nutrient-dense. Leafy greens like spinach and kale were nutrient-dense and loaded with vitamins, minerals, and fiber. They were essential for maintaining heart health, improving digestion, and supporting bone strength, key aspects of staying active as the years went by. Frank realized he hadn't been eating nearly enough of these, so he made a mental note to include them in his meals every day. 3. Omega-3 rich foods, brain and joint health. Frank had always been aware of the importance of omega-3 fatty acids in supporting brain function and reducing joint inflammation. But he hadn't truly incorporated omega-3 rich foods like salmon and walnuts into his diet on a regular basis. That was about to change. Omega-3s were essential not only for mental clarity but also for maintaining muscle mass and joint health. Critical areas of focus for seniors, and now, for him. That morning, Frank made a decision: he would incorporate these 3 foods into his daily routine. Not only would it benefit his physical health, but it would also set an example for his team and the millions of people who had started following his journey. He started small, adding a handful of berries to his breakfast smoothie, tossing leafy greens into his lunch salad, and ensuring that he had a serving of omega-3 rich food for dinner. It wasn't a drastic change, but it was a start. He felt more energized and focused after just a few days of making these small changes. By the end of the week, Frank's energy levels had improved. His sleep was more restful, and he was starting to feel more like himself again. His body was thanking him for the small yet impactful changes. He realized that his previous focus on scaling up his business had left him in a cycle of burnout. But with these new habits in place, Frank felt more balanced. More equipped to tackle the challenges of his career without sacrificing his well-being. He made it a point to include self-care in his daily routine, setting aside time for exercise, cooking healthy meals, and taking moments to relax and recharge. It was an ongoing process, but he was beginning to see the benefits in both his physical health and his mental clarity. It wasn't long before Frank shared his journey with his team. In one of their weekly meetings, he spoke openly about the challenges he had faced with work-life balance and how he had decided to take his own health more seriously. He also shared the impact of the 3 foods he had begun to incorporate into his diet and how they had made a noticeable difference in his energy levels. "I've realized something important," Frank said, looking around the table. "We talk about empowering seniors to live healthier, more active lives, but I wasn't setting the best example. Now, I'm focused on making sure we lead by example. Starting with taking care of ourselves. We're in this together, and we can't serve others if we don't first take care of our own health." The team nodded in agreement, inspired by Frank's vulnerability and commitment. It was a reminder that no matter how successful the company became, their personal well-being had to be a priority if they were to continue to lead the revolution for seniors. As Frank continued his journey to balance, he found that his personal growth was intertwined with the success of the company. The better he felt physically, the clearer his thinking became. His mission was stronger than ever, empowering seniors to live their best lives through holistic wellness, and now he was living it himself. Frank knew that the road to balance would be ongoing. There would always be challenges in scaling a business and meeting the demands of a growing industry. But he also knew that with each small decision he made for his health, he was moving closer to his ultimate goal: helping seniors everywhere live longer, healthier, and more fulfilling lives. He had learned that true success wasn't just about what he could achieve for others, it was about what he could achieve for himself, too. The conference room buzzed with energy as Frank addressed his growing team. The walls were lined with posters of the senior wellness movement they had started, a movement that was no longer just a project but a global phenomenon. They were now working with doctors, nutritionists, and senior advocates from across the world, all united in their mission to redefine aging. "All right, team," Frank began, standing in front of a large screen. "We've done something amazing. We've created a product that's changing lives. But we're just getting started. The next phase is going to be bigger, bolder, and more impactful than ever before." There was a collective nod from the group as they gathered around the table, eagerly awaiting the next steps. Over the past few months, Frank had found himself at the forefront of a new way of thinking about aging. His product had gained global recognition, but he realized that the future of aging wasn't just about a product, it was about an ecosystem of support. Aging, he believed, needed to be understood as a multifaceted journey, not just a phase of life to endure. Frank looked at his team, his mind racing with ideas for the future. The key is to create an ecosystem, something that combines education, technology, physical health, and mental wellness. Seniors don't just need products, they need a community that supports them in every way. We need to provide the tools, the resources, and the knowledge that will allow them to live empowered lives, no matter their age. The team nodded in agreement. Frank's vision had always been clear. It wasn't just about physical health, it was about a holistic approach to well-being. Their work had already made waves, but this next phase would amplify their message and expand their impact even further. We need to scale our product, Frank continued, but we also need to develop a digital platform, a space where seniors can learn about nutrition, fitness, mental wellness, and have access to support from professionals. We need to connect them to the latest research and tools that will help them live longer, healthier lives. This isn't just a product, it's a movement. One of the biggest changes Frank and his team were now focused on was the development of a comprehensive digital platform. It would allow seniors to track their health, connect with wellness experts, and participate in virtual fitness classes tailored specifically for their needs. Frank envisioned a platform where seniors could interact with others who shared similar goals and experiences. They could engage in virtual support groups, join online fitness challenges, and access expert advice, all designed to make aging a more positive and proactive experience. We've created a product, Frank said, but now we need to create a lifestyle. We need to meet seniors where they are and give them the tools to live their lives fully. Whether they're at home, in a nursing facility, or out in the community, they need to know that they have the support they need. To ensure that the platform would provide the best possible care and advice, Frank and his team began forming strategic partnerships with healthcare providers, fitness experts, and senior care organizations. They worked closely with doctors who specialized in geriatric care, mental health professionals, and certified nutritionists to create content that would address the unique challenges of aging. One of the most exciting developments was a partnership with a leading neuroscience institute that was researching cognitive health and longevity. Through this collaboration, Frank's team was able to integrate cutting-edge research into the platform, providing seniors with the latest insights on how to maintain brain health and prevent cognitive decline. "We're not just selling a product anymore," Frank said. "We're creating a legacy. The platform will become the go-to place for seniors who want to live their best lives. And it will evolve with them, adapting to their needs as they grow." The success of the product in North America had been unprecedented, but Frank knew the movement needed to go global. As word spread about the senior wellness revolution, inquiries began pouring in from Europe, Asia, and Latin America. People everywhere wanted to know how they could bring the product to their own countries and communities. The team began looking at logistics, supply chains, and translations of their platform. They also started building relationships with international senior care organizations and local experts in each region. "We need to make sure that what we're doing here in the US can work anywhere in the world," Frank explained. "Aging isn't confined to one country, one culture, or one set of circumstances. This is a global issue. And if we're going to change the future of aging, we need to take our message to the world." As the plans for expansion grew, Frank found himself reflecting more deeply on the journey he had taken. The movement he had started was no longer just a project, it had become his life's work. But in all the excitement, he knew that he had to remain grounded in the core mission that had inspired him in the first place, helping seniors live their lives to the fullest. Frank paused for a moment, looking around the room at his team, at the visionaries who had helped him bring this dream to life. They had built something incredible, something that had already changed so many lives. But the road ahead was even more exciting, filled with possibilities that Frank had never imagined. He thought about his own journey, how he had struggled with the pressures of balancing work and health, how he had learned the importance of self-care. It wasn't just about products or technology, it was about a mindset. Aging, for Frank, was no longer something to fear, it was something to embrace, a new chapter filled with potential. As he walked to the window and looked out at the horizon, Frank knew that the future of aging was brighter than ever. And he was ready to lead it into a new era. Frank sat in the quiet of his office, staring at the screen of his computer as he reviewed the latest data coming from the senior wellness platform. The numbers were staggering. Millions of seniors from around the world had registered, engaged with content, and incorporated healthier habits into their lives. They were not just surviving, they were thriving. Yet, for all the success, Frank couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him here, the long nights, the doubts, the sacrifices, and ultimately, the transformation he had gone through, both personally and professionally. As Frank looked out the window of his office, he could see the city skyline in the distance. The hustle and bustle of daily life seemed so far removed from the quiet, reflective place he was in now. When he had started this journey, he had simply wanted to make a difference for seniors. But the movement had become much bigger than that. It was about redefining aging, about showing people that they could live with vitality, purpose, and joy, no matter how old they were. He thought back to the first time he'd heard about the issues facing seniors. The increasing rates of chronic disease, the lack of access to proper care, the isolation many elderly people faced, it had all seemed overwhelming. But it was then that Frank realized something important: if he could build a company that transformed industries, then surely he could help change the conversation around aging. That realization was the spark that had ignited the entire movement. It wasn't just about a product, it was about a paradigm shift. Aging didn't have to be about loss and decline. It could be about empowerment, independence, and strength. As the senior wellness revolution spread, Frank was continually amazed by the stories that flooded in. Seniors from across the world, those living in remote villages, in urban centers, in assisted living communities, had adopted the principles of the movement. They were eating better, moving more, and engaging in the community. They were no longer passive participants in life, they were active, driven, and full of potential. Frank received letters from people who had found new purpose in their lives after adopting the habits that the movement had promoted. Some had taken up hobbies they'd long since abandoned, while others had become active volunteers in their communities. Many spoke about how their mental health had improved as a result of adopting the holistic wellness strategies, the exercise, the nutritious foods, the mental and emotional support. But it wasn't just about the seniors themselves. Their families, their caregivers, and the people around them were also seeing the changes. Children saw their parents gain energy, strength, and confidence. Spouses celebrated newfound vigor, and friends marveled at the mental clarity and joy that seniors were now radiating. It's about living fully, Frank thought to himself. It's not about waiting for the inevitable decline. It's about embracing the opportunities that each year brings. One of the most powerful outcomes of the movement was the way it began to shift societal attitudes toward aging. Frank had always believed that aging was a personal journey, but he now realized that it was also a collective one. The wellness revolution had begun to change the way people viewed seniors, not as burdens, but as active, contributing members of society. The media had caught wind of the movement, and Frank was regularly invited to speak at conferences, on television, and in podcasts about the future of aging. But it wasn't just about talking about the issues, it was about showing the world the possibilities. It was about demonstrating that seniors could be strong, resilient, and active participants in their own lives. He thought about how far the conversation had come. When he first started, aging was often seen through the lens of decline, an inevitable part of life that people simply had to endure. But now, thanks to the work they had all done, aging was being seen as something to look forward to, a time of wisdom, growth, and opportunity. Frank smiled as he reflected on how his own outlook had changed. He had once viewed aging as something to fear, something to fight against. Now, he understood it as a natural part of life that could be embraced and made beautiful with the right tools, mindset, and approach. As the movement grew, Frank began to think about what the future would look like. There were still challenges ahead: chronic diseases, isolation, inadequate healthcare for the elderly, but he had seen enough to know that change was possible. The movement had already made a huge impact, but there was so much more to do. Frank's vision for the future was one of continuous evolution. The digital platform would continue to grow, incorporating new research and emerging technologies that could further support seniors. Virtual reality experiences, AI-powered health trackers, and personalized wellness plans, these were just a few of the innovations that Frank believed could help seniors live even more vibrant lives. But perhaps most importantly, Frank knew that the movement had to remain grassroots. It had to stay connected to the people it was designed to help. That meant continued engagement, continued learning, and most importantly, continued empathy. Frank's legacy wouldn't just be about the technology or the products he had created. It would be about the community that had formed around the movement. It would be about the shift in how society viewed aging, no longer as something to be feared, but as a chapter full of promise. As the day wore on, Frank found himself reflecting on his own journey. From the early days of starting a company to the launch of the senior wellness movement, he had come a long way. But the most meaningful part of the journey had been the personal transformation he had undergone. He had learned that health and well-being were not just about physical fitness or a product, they were about a holistic approach to life, one that considered the mind, body, and soul. He thought about his own aging process, the lessons he had learned, and the importance of maintaining his health, not just for himself, but for those he loved and for those he was trying to help. His mission was no longer just a business, it was his calling, his life's work. And he was determined to continue leading the way, showing the world that aging could be a beautiful, powerful, and fulfilling process. As Frank closed his laptop and stood up from his desk, he took a deep breath and looked out at the sunset. The future of aging was bright. He had done his part, but the movement would live on, long after he was gone. I guess it's true, Frank thought. Aging isn't a curse. It's a blessing. And with the right tools, we can make it a beautiful one. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?